the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 251 The FBI Invites. Having successfully rescued another scumbag, the Tinker felt nothing. After all, the people he would harm in the future would be the Americans, so what was he to do with? He couldn't possibly expect only poor, good people to come after him. He could play the role of a blacklisted doctor, offering free medical treatment to the poor without asking for anything in return. In reality, truly good people don't covet such free resources. They also know how to effectively utilize the resources at hand, avoiding the situation of being forced to rely on charity. They might not become wealthy, but they wouldn't starve to death. Based on the Tinker's experience over the past 6 months, anyone who comes after him is either bad or stupid. Think about the saying, there's always something hateful about pitiful people, drinking to the point of liver cancer, smoking to lung cancer, chewing betel nut to oral cancer, and promiscuous sex to AIDS. How could a good person do these things? These people might be considered vulnerable, but they weren't necessarily good. Then there were parents who would rather spend their money on drugs and then bring their sick children to seek free medical care, or there were poor people who, believing their illnesses weren't serious enough, waited until they were terminally ill before seeking medical help. If saving or not saving a patient depended on their goodness or badness, the Tinker wouldn't have the opportunity to hone his medical skills and gain clinical experience. He remembered clearly that his original intention wasn't to do good deeds, but simply to find free guinea pigs. Compared to scientists conducting illegal human experiments, at least saving lives was a secondary goal, not experimenting or killing. Leaving Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the Tinker planned to find a dark alley with no surveillance and use his super speed to get home. While America wasn't as entrenched in the streets and alleys as it is today, with surveillance cameras monitoring every move, Cedars-Sinai, as a top-tier medical center, still prioritized security. Consequently, surveillance cameras were installed in numerous locations, leaving virtually no one unattended. He had to walk further, or else enter the only fire escape between 2 apartment buildings near the medical center. Although his abilities had already been leaked to some, they hadn't been made public. So, in daily life, he avoided using them if possible, and kept them hidden if possible. That was the general principle. However, today, a car was parked in this normally unused fire escape. The Tinker noticed 3 people inside. Turning back after seeing something would be too conspicuous. To avoid appearing unusual, the Tinker decided to cross the fire escape and find a less surveilled and pedestrian area, then use his super speed to escape. Regardless, strolling down the streets of Los Angeles while dressed as a Tinker felt a bit strange. Halfway through, the Tinker sensed something was amiss. The 3 people in the car seemed a bit agitated. Should he turn back? Or, just watch the excitement? By the time he passed the car, it was too late to run. The 3 people in the car got out simultaneously, surrounding the Tinker's path from front to back. Running would have seemed like a guilty conscience. Let's see what they're up to, the Tinker thought. The man across from him wasn't exactly a puzzler. The one in charge immediately pulled out his ID and said, "FBI. I'm Senior Special Agent James. I hope you'll cooperate with our investigation, sir." While his tone was rather soft, the other 2, besides the FBI agent, were already holding guns, though they weren't pointing them at anyone. The Tinker, carrying his briefcase, asked, "Do you have a warrant?" The baseball bat had been crushed into an aluminum pancake before leaving the medical center to destroy the evidence and thrown into his briefcase. It seemed he'd acted too quickly. What a shame. Agent James smiled and said, "I don't have a warrant, so I told you to cooperate." "What if I don't?" the Tinker asked. "There's always a way to get you to agree, right? Those with power always find a way to make trouble for him. Unless he has a powerful lawyer on his side, someone who can silence him." It wasn't just the Tinker reading a few law books and memorizing the statutes that would help. The most important thing was his lawyer's license. Without it, even if you can defend yourself in court, you still have to cooperate with law enforcement agencies like the police and the FBI and follow the proper procedures. Failure to cooperate would establish a criminal offense, and in serious cases, you could even be forced to empty your magazine on the spot. Even if you successfully defend yourself and are ultimately acquitted, you still need a lawyer to back you up if you want to file a complaint against the police or other law enforcement agencies. This is what makes them truly afraid. Otherwise, even if the law is correctly cited, the content is well substantiated, and the evidence is complete, the case will still be ignored. So, just because you've memorized legal books doesn't mean you're invincible. A lawyer's license is what intimidates law enforcement. Without it, the repairman could only ask helplessly, "How can I know what the matter is? Someone reported the surgery I just had," the repairman thought. But Cedars-Sinai Medical Center wouldn't do that. If they were to report their own mistakes, they would also be held liable for renting out the operating room. That would be like damaging their own reputation. Fortunately, Agent James quickly responded, saying, "We're requesting your cooperation in the investigation of Andrew Saxon, the leader of a criminal gang." The Tinker instantly realized they were after the remaining medical fees from the $1 million. Since the Tinker couldn't provide any evidence of Andrew Saxon's crimes to convict him, arresting him was pointless. So, the only option was to find someone to get him out. Or, could he surrender his ill-gotten gains, admit to practicing medicine illegally, and follow the rules? Would that resolve the matter? Inwardly weighing the consequences of various options, the Tinker sighed and said, "I see. I guess I won't have to be cuffed. If one wanted to survive in human society, one had to follow the rules. It wasn't impossible to escape. At most, one would have to abandon the Tinker persona." The problem was that the Tinker identity wasn't completely separated from the Henry Brown identity, and many people knew the connection between the two. Despite having a different face, black and white hair, and a prominent scar. However, if someone truly wanted to investigate, they could still trace the blame back to Henry Brown. This reminded him of the warning old Tom had given him when he'd been applying for documents in Alaska. If you're going to do anything bad, don't do it under the name Henry Brown. If you mess up the name, you'll be in big trouble later. As the saying goes, even if you're taught once, you can still learn. This lesson was truly memorable. Agent James didn't pull out the handcuffs, he simply opened the back door and gestured. "Please," he said, "this isn't the place to talk. Let's find another suitable location." This wasn't the first time he'd encountered this sort of thing. Did the FBI always do this? They'd take people away under the guise of assisting with an investigation? And then they'd threaten them verbally if they refused. He should investigate whether this practice was legal or just a way to scare those with hidden agendas. Should he confront them head-on? Was that the right course of action? Chapter 252, Nowhere. The Tinker's briefcase was taken by the FBI and thrown in the trunk. Before putting it away, they carefully searched inside for anything out of place. They found only simple medical equipment and some tablet-shaped medications. As long as they weren't in meter-sized form, it would be difficult for the average person to directly associate them with illicit drugs. Unless they carefully investigated the medication's origins, there would be problems. The Tinker sat in the middle of the back seat, flanked by the FBI's agents. Agent James drove the car, choosing secluded roads and heading towards the suburbs. Although he didn't know the FBI's destination, the Tinker was certain they weren't planning on going to the FBI's Los Angeles office. That was in the city center, not the suburbs. This strange behavior made the Tinker pay more attention to the two people beside him. Through X-ray vision, he found no FBI ID in their wallets. There was no other identification in their other pockets. Were these two not FBI agents? But Agent James, who was driving, had genuine ID on him. At least compared to the FBI agent's credentials he'd seen while accompanying Ms. Hepburn, there weren't any obvious flaws in the regulations. So what was going on now? The Tinker was confused. Kryptonians possessed a wide range of abilities, but they couldn't read minds. So the Tinker could only be patient and wait to see what the other party was up to. Otherwise, he wouldn't know how to respond. This passive wait for someone to reveal their true intentions felt rather unpleasant, but he had to cooperate, as American police practiced this kind of sting operation quite often. They'd start by harassing someone for some inexplicable reason, a practice everyone knew wasn't always legal. But if the person being harassed reacted emotionally or physically, it could become irrefutable evidence of a crime. This was why American law enforcement lacked credibility with certain groups. It was all because they'd been ripped off so many times. It seemed he needed to change his attitude and stay away from these people. Everyone in the car was silent, and a heavy, depressing atmosphere hung heavy. Putting aside the fact that the Tinker wasn't a talkative person, the two people sitting beside him were more like prison guards escorting a prisoner, their taciturn demeanor exerting an invisible pressure. Only Agent James, driving, was a bit busier. He'd glance left and right through the windshield, then choose a detour. Once in the suburbs, he'd continue on the side roads, eventually turning onto a road leading into the forest, one that wasn't even paved. The Tinker understood something, but remained silent. Finally, the car stopped where it couldn't go any further, deep in the forest. While there wasn't any snow in the Los Angeles forests during the winter, the temperatures were freezing. A breath would puff out a cloud of white mist. It was at this point that Agent James, in the driver's seat, said, "Get out." The Tinker feigned surprise. "Is this the right place for this conversation?" "Perfect," Agent James said, turning his head and baring his yellow teeth towards the back seat. He then winked at his companion. One of them got out of the car first, while the man on the other side pushed and shoved the repairman out. Before he could stand firm, he was hit by the butt of a pistol, knocking him to his knees. This was of course due to the repairman's good acting skills and good coordination. Otherwise, the blow on the back of the head would be only slightly more noticeable than a mosquito or fly landing on the skin. The man who hit the man with the butt of the gun asked anxiously, "Tell me, where did you hide the $600,000? Not to mention that you spent all the money in just 2 months." Although he was kneeling on the ground, the repairman stood up and asked back, "Is this an official business of the FBI? I can appeal your illegal interrogation and torture," Agent James said with a sly smile. "Do you think you still have the chance to leave here alive and complain to the FBI about me? Because you played some childish tricks in your clinic, which made my boss hate me. You can't imagine what kind of life I have been leading in the past 2 months. I was transferred to the unencumbered post of guarding the database with a simple order. I couldn't go out on the field, so I received no service bonuses, and I'd never get any bonuses. The family mortgage, my ex-wife's alimony, all those inexplicable debts that popped up out of nowhere. I've worked so hard to live a better life, but God doesn't respond to my efforts. I'm left to find my own solutions. You can agree, right? I'm sorry for your situation. You're a criminal, and that's ill-gotten gains. I'm simply exercising my power to maintain social order. I want money to be used by good people, not to starve to death while the bad guys live unpunished and enjoy an enviable life, so I suggest you tell me the truth about the money. It'll save you some pain, save us some trouble, and it's a win-win situation." The Tinker was stunned by this twisted logic. His eyes widened as he asked, "Sir, you're a government law enforcement officer. Is this okay? Do you think you can hide what you've done?" Agent James and his two companions exchanged a smile and said, "Why not? No one knows what I'm going to do, no one saw us taking you away, and this place is so remote it's not very well known. That means, no matter what happens to you today, you'll just be a missing person. Do you know how many missing people there are in the United States each year, and how many of those are found? As long as there's no body, there's no murder. Without a murder, there won't be a major investigation. Ultimately, in our eyes, you're just an insignificant number. I'm not afraid to tell you, these two friends of mine are comrades in the military. Unfortunately, they left the service in disgrace due to mistreatment of prisoners. Believe me, you don't want to fall into their hands. So just tell us the whereabouts of the money, and you'll avoid torture and die peacefully. Otherwise, you'll beg us to end your life." "No one knows all this?" the Tinker asked, tilting his head. Agent James said firmly, "No one knows. How can you be so sure? Maybe you gave yourself away somewhere." Agent James laughed triumphantly with his companions and said, "You're not expecting anyone to come and rescue you, are you? The Continental Hotel? That's impossible. No one knows what happened to you or what happened here." Chapter 253 delivered to the door. The Tinker's expression was one of shock, a sight that delighted Agent James immensely. Even his two companions whistled with delight, enjoying the despair they had brought upon themselves. Agent James then revealed, "Haha, what do I do? I'm intimately familiar with police and FBI procedures. Ever since that failed operation, I haven't mentioned you at all. No one would know I was targeting you. Even the news of your visit to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center was a tip gathered by others, and it has no direct connection to me. Even they only knew about the big deal, not that it involved you. So, even if they let it slip, it was impossible. I'm telling you all this to make you give up on this idea. I've considered every possible aspect. As for the Continental Hotel, they're powerful, Sure, but how much will they do for you? Are you worthy enough to warrant their retaliation? Don't expect those shady little rats to jump out for a mere insignificant person like you. You're not that important. And yet you foolishly took on a fortune you couldn't protect. That's where you made your mistake, Alice. Why is it so easy for others to rob others, but I get into trouble if I do it occasionally? Is this because I didn't silence the witness completely? It seems that I have to be smarter in the future. The repairman sighed in his heart and stood up, brushing off the dirt on his knees as if nothing had happened. And his action, of course, aroused the dissatisfaction of James and others. The man who was pointing a gun at the repairman from behind hit him again with the butt of the gun. This time the repairman did not cooperate with the acting, and that little bit of strength had no effect on him. After being hit, he just turned around and grinned at the white man who thought everything was under control. "What are you laughing at? Kneel down," as he said. He hit him with the butt of the gun again. But the result was the same. The repairman did not even move. And it didn't seem like he was holding on, it felt like he was hitting a block of iron. Now others also felt something was wrong, and they all raised their guns and aimed. Agent James threatened more sternly, "I advise you to cooperate well, otherwise we will shoot." Just as the Tinker faced Agent James, exposing his back to others, the guilty guy who had hit the Tinker with the butt of his gun several times couldn't help but pull the trigger and shot the target in the back of the head. But the Tinker seemed to have eyes on his back and dodged the shot with incredible speed. Just as the bullet passed over the Tinker and then grazed Agent James' cheek, and was about to hit the tree, the Tinker reached out and grabbed it from behind. This was to prevent the environment here from leaving traces of the bullet and bloodstains with DNA. Everyone present stared in amazement at the bullet that dodged and then ran behind James to grab something in an instant. Their short-circuited brains did not realize what they had seen at this moment. In an instant, a noun emerged in their minds. One of them said, "You are a mutant." The Tinker didn't wait for the others to finish speaking, and used his super speed again. This time he threw all three people back into the car they drove, and then used the heat rays to quickly weld the car doors. Power windows weren't standard on cars of that era, and they only worked when the car was started. This wasn't a particularly old model, so it had manual crank windows. So, upon realizing they were thrown back into the car, some tried to open the doors, some frantically banged on the windows, and still others yelled, "Let us out," while cranking the window cranks, trying to lower them as quickly as possible so they could get out. Honestly, you're law enforcement officers. You're making a fool of me, a law-abiding alien, by doing this, and there were plenty of people who laughed at me. How could the dissatisfied repairman give them a chance? He supported the bottom of the car with both hands, lifted it up easily, and then crawled under the car, lifting the whole car off the ground. Then he flew into the sky. The other party was kind enough to cover up all traces for him, and taught him a lesson, that is, there is no case without a body. How could a repairman not learn and apply it immediately? Using aqua regia or heat ray incineration to destroy the body is too slow. Sinking it into the sea or throwing it in the deep mountains and forests will still have the chance of being discovered. So the repairman, holding the car, flew vertically upwards at a very fast speed, and soon rushed out of the atmosphere. That is to say, the three people in the car had already fainted during the upward stage, unable to withstand the strong G-force. The repairman did not want to use the bio-force field to protect anyone. And his speed was much faster than the escape velocity of the Earth, and even far higher than the thrust of all the rockets on Earth. The three people in the car were not simply unconscious, but had serious injuries including organ damage. But before they could even feel the thinning air and the drop in temperature, the vacuum of the atmosphere quickly claimed their lives. Like balloons, the three of them were stretched to their limits by the internal pressure. The internal bleeding from damaged organs made their swollen skin red, practically oozing blood. Henry, for the first time since mastering flight, was still a bit uneasy. But the warm glow of the yellow sun quickly lifted the discomfort. Warmth washed over him, and he could feel a noticeable increase in strength. The object in his hands had already become light, having escaped Earth's gravity. If he let go, the car might remain stuck in its orbit, circling the Earth forever until it collided with something else and changed its direction. The Tinkerer had no desire to add another useless object to Earth's already busy satellite orbit. He grabbed the car's front bumper, spun around, and launched it towards the sun. According to the Tinker's calculations, at this rate, in a few months, this car, which shouldn't have been in outer space, would be captured by the sun's gravity and sucked into that massive, high-temperature incinerator, leaving nothing behind. With such a method of destroying a body, it shouldn't be possible for anyone to find any traces and trace it back to him. Besides observing the falling spirit or seeing a vision, the tinkerer couldn't think of any other possibilities. So, what about the souls of the deceased? Could demons like Mephisto enter the sun to retrieve them? Or would they drift back to Earth on their own? Or would they leave their bodies at the moment of death? Henry was curious. He drifted through space, basking in the sunlight, wondering if he had made any mistakes recently. Why was he always being bothered by these inexplicable people? However, just minutes ago, at the U.S. military's early warning radar base on the West Coast, the operator noticed an anomaly on the radar map and immediately pressed the alarm button. The officer on duty immediately came to the radar operator and asked, "What did you find?" An unidentified object. Just as the radar operator pointed out the anomaly on the radar chart, the target disappeared. This unexpected change made both the men frown. Looking at the radar chart, all the civilian aircraft flight numbers and routes were normal, as if the anomaly was just a screen glitch. Where did that just come from? The radar operator hesitated. Answer, sir, it's on the mainland, within California. And it's not moving. What's going on? The officer on duty was also encountering this situation for the first time. He asked, are there any other characteristics? Although the target didn't move, its altitude increased very quickly. I suspect it disappeared because it exceeded the radar's detection altitude. Was it an ICBM? Or a NASA rocket launch? Why didn't the nuclear early warning system sound an alarm? That's unlikely. There's no missile launch base or NASA launch site there. Besides, wouldn't we be notified in advance of such an action? And the target is very small, not the size of a rocket. Then what do you think it was? I don't know either, sir, the radar operator said honestly. He looked at his superior's tangled expression and asked, should we record this abnormal incident and report it to our superiors? After racking his brains for a while, the officer on duty said, report it truthfully. Since the target appeared briefly and then disappeared, it is impossible to judge the threat it poses. It is not our responsibility to investigate what this thing is. Others will do it, okay, sir. After the radar operator said a few words to the radar operator sitting next to him, he went to prepare the written report. Chapter 254, Distant Relatives. With the arrival of the new year, Henry lay on the sofa in his rented apartment, basking in the winter sun. He didn't feel like doing anything, just pretending to be idle. Kitty, the male tiger cub, had more than doubled in size after 6 months of feeding. Previously only the length of his forearm and palm, she had now stretched out, almost reaching Henry's height. Kitty was also sprawled on a large, sunny cat climbing frame, her legs dangling from the sides, basking in the warm sun. Because Kryptonians are invulnerable to cold or heat, Henry didn't pay much attention to the heating system. However, the house contained a number of heat-sensitive computer equipment, so the air conditioning was constantly on during the summer. Having a tiger didn't change that. After all, they had their own fur for warmth, unlike humans. Of course, Kitty didn't protest. When it was time to bask in the sun, she would just sit quietly for a while, sparing the poor baby. The tiger translator had made considerable progress. At least Kitty could understand limited commands and act according to Henry's wishes. For example, the classic sit, reach, circle, stop, and come. As for eating, there's no need to teach her. At the scent of meat, Katie knows to sit down at the food bowl. After being slapped a few times by Henry, she's well behaved and won't touch anything on the table. Although the Black Clinic has reopened, Henry's enthusiasm isn't as high as before. Previously, he hoped to diagnose more difficult and complicated cases, like a medical center, and broaden his clinical experience. But with a Continental Hotel system as its primary clientele, most of the patients come in for knife and gun injuries. Simple surgical procedures hold little appeal for Kryptonians. So, Henry's current attitude is more like trying to maintain the clinic's operations until he finds another job. He's checked the Continental Hotel's exit policy. Basically, if the client doesn't want to work, then they can leave, and there's no restriction on leaving. The reason Baba Yaga's John Wick embarks on Mission Impossible to seek an exit is because he's leaving the Russian gang, not the Continental Hotel. All gangs, ancient and modern, Chinese and foreign, are the same, easy to get into, hard to leave. Putting aside those hypothetical excuses, the reality is that anyone who's been in a gang knows some insider secrets. If people are allowed to come and go freely, then those who leave might reveal these secrets to the police or rival gangs, causing losses to the gang. What then? Therefore, it's better to raise the barrier to leaving and keep people within the gang. The Continental Hotel doesn't have this problem. It's simply a platform for freelancers and contract gunmen. As long as they don't touch deeper secrets, there's no need to restrict their freedom. Furthermore, the Tinker's identity has already attracted the attention of the FBI. After previously killing an agent, the FBI, as expected, was unable to trace the Tinker back to him. At least things have been relatively quiet lately, with no one bothering him. But that doesn't mean Tinker is worry-free. After all, he's already on the FBI's radar. If an agent ever gets mad, they could come back and cause trouble. Therefore, the Tinker at the Black Clinic has been keeping a much lower profile lately. Furthermore, with the unfortunate example of Andrew Saxon, the gang leaders preferred to seek treatment through the hospital system rather than from an unlicensed, secret doctor who would call the police. However, this made those with criminal records and wanted individuals even more reluctant to approach the Black Clinics. They feared being charged exorbitant sums by the Tinkerers and subsequently arrested. Consequently, fewer people were willing to go to the Black Clinics. Henry, on the other hand, felt more relaxed. Saving lives had never been his primary goal. He thought he would spend the afternoon tinkering with his old stuff, when the tiger cub, Katie, suddenly growled. The translation software connected to the baby and the brainwave sensor emitted a mechanical tone through the speaker, someone's ear. This was one of Henry's recent achievements. Although his own brain could translate the tiger's voice by comparing it to the sounds of the tiger once he had collected enough templates, Henry had also installed a speaker so that Katie could speak human language through the machine. Shortly after Katie's words were transmitted through the speaker, the doorbell rang. Henry reluctantly struggled out of bed and walked to the door. Although there wasn't a peephole in the door, he could see through his X-ray vision. It was old Gary who rang the doorbell, shuffling awkwardly in front of the door, as if ready to bolt at any moment. Henry opened the door and greeted, "Hello, Gary." The startled landlord waved his hand coquettishly, "Hello, Henry," and then leaned over to greet a large cat on the cat tree inside. "Hello, Katie," roar, "hello." After greeting, old Gary pulled Henry out and closed the door. "That was a tiger roar just now, wasn't it? You told me you had a tabby." "You misheard, Gary. My cat has a unique meow. It's hoarse," a Kryptonian lied with his eyes wide open. "But it's so big, that's fat. Anyway, don't let your little cat bite anyone. I'll definitely call the police." Okay. "Tell me what you're looking for me for." Henry quickly changed the subject. Old Gary said, "Let me put it this way. A distant relative of my ex-wife is visiting Los Angeles and wants someone to show her around, especially Hollywood. She says she might end up in Hollywood, just like you did when you first came to Los Angeles. I think you two would have something in common, and you have a car and a lot of free time. Are you interested in taking the job? The pay isn't great, but I can cover your gas and meals out, as long as you don't choose those exorbitantly expensive restaurants that specifically rip off tourists, ex-wives, distant relative. With that relationship, are you going to secretly tell me to take her to the South Side and dump her on the street and give her a lesson?" Henry asked, his voice low. "That's not true." Old Gary shook his hand. "I have a good relationship with her family, but not with that woman. And after all, she's my children's family. Even if I can't accompany them every step of the way, I'll do my best to help them." "Oh, okay." Henry didn't refuse old Gary's request. This male landlord, whose female attire was ahead of its time, had done him many favors. He felt obliged to offer a helping hand, considering it was a favor he'd repay. He asked, "Who's that?" "Barbara Morse." "Wait, that name sounds familiar." A girl, and only now did Henry realize that old Gary had been using she. His expression turned rather strange. Henry asked, "You're trusting me with a girl from your ex-wife's distant relative? Aren't you really expecting me to go on a rampage and do something monstrous?" Barbara is also a name for an American market stall, and the last name Morse isn't particularly unusual. Henry didn't necessarily assume this distant relative was the one from SHIELD, but handing a girl over to a tenant, was that a sign of heartlessness, or trust in him? Old Gary smiled nonchalantly. "I've met that girl. She was a gymnastics champion in high school. Although she has no relevant experience, she's quite skilled and seems capable in combat. She's also quite intelligent and currently attending Georgia Tech. I suggested that if she wants to pursue a career in Hollywood, she could go the route of a martial arts actress. It's a path no one has yet mastered." With her looks, she has a chance. Okay, that sounds right. Comrade Barbara Morse, a former gymnastics champion. I wonder if it's too late to refuse now. Chapter 255 Barbara Morse. Perhaps it was just a name, coincidences were rare. Henry was stunned upon seeing her in person. The woman before him had long, wavy blonde hair, celestial blue eyes, a toned, curvaceous figure, and a delicate face. Everything about her was a strikingly perfect blonde beauty. They had met at a cafe that also served breakfast. Barbara Morse, who had arrived earlier, was enjoying a bagel and a fragrant cup of black coffee. She was wearing a matte rose-colored long-sleeved t-shirt with the words "Asking Me About My Feminist Agenda" printed on it, jeans, and sneakers. To prepare for the California winter, she had a brown wool coat draped over the back of a chair, a woolen hat tucked into its pocket. Her overall look was casual yet stylish. The brown coat was a sure sign of their meeting, and since there was only one other customer in the cafe, Henry couldn't be mistaken. He walked up and asked, "Is this Miss Barbara Morse?" "I'm Henry Brown, your Los Angeles guide, whom Gary brought in." Barbara Morse stood up and shook hands, saying, "Hello, Mr. Brown. Just call me Bobby." Bobby was Barbara's nickname. Men don't extend their hands when greeting each other. But since the other person was being kind, Henry politely returned the gesture. He gently shook her hand and said, "In that case, you can just call me Henry." "Have you had breakfast?" Barbara asked after they sat down. "Me neither," Henry said with a smile. He then waved over the waiter and said, "Give me the same." It's considered rude to watch others eat or to keep them waiting for your own meal when you first meet them. So Henry's ordering the same thing was appropriate. It wouldn't be nice to startle others by eating too much. Eating, after all, involves the mouth, so it's polite to put down your knife and fork and swallow your food while you talk. To avoid interrupting, Henry didn't ask anxious questions, simply extending his hand to gesture for her to eat. Barbara smiled in response and continued to eat her firm, unfilled bagel. Because breakfast items like these were already prepared, no preparation was required, Henry's portion arrived quickly, and he devoured the dry bagel in just a few bites. Both of them were left with only coffee. Then Henry asked, "Bobby, are you taking advantage of winter break to visit Los Angeles?" "Yes, Georgia Tech, don't you think so?" "Blonde girls are dumb, that's the playboy stereotype," Barbara Morse asked with a sweet smile. Henry quickly shook her head and said, "That's not the case. It's just that as a top-tier research university in the United States, Georgia Tech is one of the 3 major institutes of technology, along with MIT and Caltech. This isn't like Harvard or Oxford, where you can just get in through donations and alumni connections. Getting into a school like that is truly remarkable. Without real talent, even graduating with a degree would be difficult. So I have to see what kind of genius it takes to achieve something like this. After all, I don't even have a high school diploma. For me, you're just a distant, unattainable dream. I'm an alien. I just don't have a degree, so what? There's nothing wrong with that." Barbara laughed and said, "She's just a superficial, silly blonde. You know, I've been in college for 3 years, and when I walk on campus, people still come up to her and say, 'Girl, are you here to visit the school? I can give you a guided tour, huh?' This also shows how stunning you are at first sight. If I were an ordinary girl, those top students from Georgia Tech probably wouldn't even think of striking up a conversation with me." "Oh, is this a compliment to my appearance?" "As long as it's an advantage, it deserves praise from others. You can't expect others to see how smart you are at first sight. Unless you are bald or have a Mediterranean hairstyle. You know, like those bald old professors." "Oh, that's too bad," Barbara said with a frown. Henry smiled and said, "So please accept the compliments with joy." But he looked at the beautiful woman before him and asked, "Old Gary said you're here to sightsee in Los Angeles and explore Hollywood. Are you serious? Why do you ask? You just complimented me on my looks, and now you're not qualified." Henry quickly shook his head and said, "Of course not. It's just that with your knowledge and wisdom, there must be other, easier ways to achieve success than through the narrow Hollywood path. Look at the people in Hollywood. It's filled with mostly underachieving students. Isn't it because they find it difficult to succeed in other fields that they rush to this world of fame and fortune to compete?" Barbara raised an eyebrow and asked, "Oh, aren't there any science and engineering geniuses in Hollywood?" "Don't bring up examples like Hedy Lamarr. That'll only make us science and engineering people laugh." Henry shrugged and replied, "I think Hedy Lamarr of the Golden Age was a very good actress. But her image as a science and engineering genius is more of a Jewish propaganda product. It is undeniable that she is very active in the field of invention. However, she has not received any formal training and mainly relies on self-study. In the intervals between filming, she has made some designs and inventions. But apart from the frequency-hopping spread-spectrum technology, she has no other achievements to show for it. Although it can be praised that the ideas of other inventions are good, such as the improvement of traffic lights and instant carbonated drink tablets. Look at her background. First of all, her father is a banker and her mother is a pianist. Because she was attracted by movies, she learned ballet and piano as basic skills and became an actor. Later, she joined the acting school of a famous director in Berlin. The frequency-hopping spread-spectrum technology was co-invented by her and a pianist, but the two of them provided more of a concept. The reason why it was not adopted at the time and was later touted was because their technical concepts did not have practical feasibility at that time. In an era without transistors and integrated circuits, you wanted to install 88 radio devices into a torpedo to evade enemy radio interference? The Japanese Kaiten torpedo, while brutal, was at least feasible. It's like a group of science fiction writers describing in vivid detail how a spaceship should be built, then using a bunch of physics theories to back up their claims. If someone truly had the ability to build a practical spaceship, they wouldn't just be writing novels. And Barbara, you're the kind of person who has a chance to build a spaceship. If you were truly interested in Hollywood, you'd know better than anyone that you should have switched majors long ago instead of wasting time on a completely different track. As for Hollywood actors, are there those with a natural talent for science and engineering? I can say there are. But their situations are just like what I said. They switched to acting-related majors early on, or dropped out of school to directly participate in acting activities, whether it's acting or scientific research. If you want to be the real top, you can't do it with this kind of idle attitude. Those smart people are more determined than anyone else, unless someone is satisfied with being just a half-baked person. Wow, I couldn't agree more with you. Hedy Lamarr is indeed an admirable woman, but she is somewhat overrated in the field of science. Barbara Morse said. Chapter 256 Hollywood Tour. So you want to come to Hollywood? Are you considering this? Is it time to change careers and become a big star? I guarantee you have a great chance, Henry said as he took a sip of coffee. Haha, a lot of people tell me that. They say a brilliant mind has no expiration date, but beauty does. If you don't cash in now and create the best memories, you'll only regret it later, Barbara Morse said. Then filming Penthouse or Playboy is more straightforward, Henry said. Being an actor isn't that easy. In this world of fame and fortune, intelligence and beauty are only part of the equation. You also need support and good luck. Of course, basic acting skills are also necessary. If your acting isn't good and you're criticized, you'll really regret not getting into this field. Haha, that's right, Barbara agreed. Without dwelling on the idea, Henry asked about the more practical aspects. I hear you've been in Los Angeles for a few days. Is there anywhere you'd like to see that you haven't been yet? Are there any chaotic places where thugs on the street are constantly shooting? Henry's smile froze. Was he just trying to put me on the spot, not even pretending? Barbara Morse's faint seriousness suddenly broke into a smile, and with a hint of the smugness of a successful prank, she said, I'm just kidding. I've only been to a few landmarks downtown these days. Can you take me to Hollywood? After finishing his coffee in one gulp, Henry asked. Of course. My car is not far away. Do you want to go with me, or wait for me to drive over? Henry asked, seeing that the other woman was dressed very casually in a t-shirt, jeans, a coat, and running shoes, which made her very mobile. If she had been wearing those pointed high heels, which would have made her look like she was walking on stilts, Henry would have asked her to wait and drove over himself. Barbara Morse wasn't so delicate as to insist on being picked up by a car. She said casually, let's go together. You didn't park too far, did you? It's just across the street, a few steps away, Henry said casually, pointing in a direction. Let's go then. Since this wasn't a date, the two of them tacitly paid their own bills. No taking advantage of anyone, no showing off. But as they left the cafe, Henry politely opened the door for them. He walked ahead of Barbara, half a body length faster. He was the only one who knew the way, so he had to lead the way. During their casual conversation, Barbara asked, I heard Gary say you've acted in Hollywood movies. Is that true? Just background roles, and they weren't big theatrical releases. Just some B-movies that went straight to video, Henry replied. I heard there was a big production. You mean Steven Seagal's Ghost Warrior? I did act in that film, but it was also a background role. And something happened midway, so I left early. I went to see the full movie in theaters later, but I wasn't in any of them. It was all cut. Editing is the producer's right. I'm just a small actor and I got paid every penny I deserved. What else can I say? Aren't you angry? Henry said calmly. What's there to be angry about? There are so many people in Hollywood, so many excellent actors, so many handsome and beautiful men and women, but opportunities are limited. It's either me or him. And everything comes at a price. It's either spending time and effort to outperform others, or it's paying something else in exchange for that opportunity. It could be money, it could be dignity. I just came here to see this glamorous world. I didn't think about the cost. So why should I be jealous when someone else gets the opportunity? It's only natural, Barbara said with a look of surprise. You don't want to be famous, are you just here to see the female stars? Henry said helplessly. The truth is, I don't know what I want to do. You see, this is the problem of not having an education. It limits many job possibilities. I've been working on jobs for the past 6 months. So if you have the opportunity to get a degree, you should do it, unless you're absolutely sure of your future after dropping out. The Black Clinic's patient intake and fee collection were volatile. Ever since the FBI's troubles, their hours had been irregular, so calling it odd jobs was perfectly acceptable. Honest Kryptonians never lied. Barbara was about to say something, but Henry spoke first. Here's my car. It's this Cadillac. Don't be fooled by its antique appearance, it's quite comfortable. Henry opened the back door for Barbara and began to invite her in. Barbara Morse said with a smirk, Can I sit in the passenger seat? The back seat was for the host or guest, while the passenger seat was for treating the other person as an equal. Henry was slightly surprised, but didn't object. He closed the back door, opened the passenger door, and said, Please get in, Ms. Bubby. Thank you. Henry climbed into the driver's seat, started the car, and began his day-long tour of Hollywood. A must-see in Hollywood is, of course, the Walk of Fame. Over 2,000 stars are adorned with the names of celebrities honored by the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. In fact, with his impressive memory, Henry could count the achievements of every star on this walk alone. This was because the list included not only filmmakers but also outstanding contributors to television, music, radio, and theater. Honestly, it would take more than a month to walk the entire walk. But at that time, Barbara Morse was just a college student. Her interest in celebrities was limited to movies she had seen and familiar celebrities, and she would linger briefly beside their stars. The rest of the time, she'd just skim through them. At most, she'd mention a few films the star had starred in to see if Barbara remembered any. Another key attraction on the Walk of Fame was, of course, the Chinese Theater, which had hosted the Academy Awards. It's also the venue for many film premieres. Its unique architecture has earned it a designation as a Los Angeles historic and cultural landmark. The handprints, footprints, and signatures left by celebrities on the concrete in front of the Chinese Theater are also a sight to behold. Then we headed to Beverly Hills. Los Angeles, and indeed the world, represents and symbolizes wealth and fame. Besides being home to many celebrities and the wealthy, Rodeo Drive is also home to dazzling luxury stores. Even if you can't afford to buy anything, simply viewing it as an art gallery is a breathtaking spectacle. Occasionally, you might even spot a celebrity along the way. The Griffith Observatory is also worth a visit. From here, you can overlook the entire Los Angeles cityscape and the iconic Hollywood Tower, a landmark that is a Los Angeles landmark. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257 Griffith Observatory. The Griffith Observatory is a popular Los Angeles attraction and a popular date spot. Both tourists and locals flock here to admire the stunning views. Visiting at night offers a bird's-eye view of the Los Angeles skyline. Although Henry and his friend arrived outside the New Year's holiday, most schools were still closed. Consequently, the observatory was packed with young men and women, creating a considerable crowd. Standing on the observation deck, Barbara, without her woolen hat, let the wind sweep her beautiful blonde hair. Her fine hair shone with a dazzling golden luster, captivating the men and women present. Not only did she captivate the men present, but also infuriated the women. Even Henry, who stood beside Barbara, became a target of inexplicable resentment. Meanwhile, this young woman, experiencing Hollywood for the first time, rested her hand at her brow as she gazed out at the Hollywood sign. "It's so small," she said with a hint of dissatisfaction. "It's far. The crow's eye distance between the two places is about 2.6 kilometers. You can still see things, so you can imagine how big the sun is. Can we go over and take a closer look?" Barbara asked. Henry pointed around and said, "Both the observatory and the Hollywood sign are within Griffith Park. There's a hiking trail nearby. If you're brave enough, you can follow the hiking trail directly from the observatory to the sign. The trail is about 10 kilometers long. It passes a bat cave along the way, and there are abundant natural sights along the way. Are you interested? Are you serious?" Barbara said with a look of disdain, looking at Henry, who was talking without hesitation. "Haha, just kidding, I'm just kidding. We're not wearing hiking gear today, so it's certainly not suitable for such an activity." "Then, can we go over and take a look?" Barbara asked again. Henry answered honestly, "Driving can shorten the distance, but the Hollywood sign itself is isolated, and there's no road leading directly to it. So we'll still have to walk a bit. If we're lucky and the administrators haven't sealed the wire gate, we can drive in. But there's no paved road inside, so it's not very comfortable to drive. Are you going to go anyway? Let's go. The writing here is too small, and it's not very pleasant to read," Barbara said enthusiastically. As an amateur guide, Henry certainly wouldn't object to the tourists' wishes and spoil their fun. If they wanted to go, then let's go. After all, if they had to walk blindly after arriving at their destination, 9 out of 10 would give up. So the two of them drove again, heading towards the Hollywood sign, which was only 2.6 kilometers away as the straight line, but required a long detour. Henry, running out of things to say, explained, "The Hollywood sign is located on the south slope of Mount Lee in the Santa Monica Mountains. At the top of the mountain is a radio transmitter. This was once the home of the Los Angeles television station until it stopped transmitting in 1951. But to this day, non-commercial FM stations still operate there. Aside from these two locations, Mount Lee isn't national or state property. Most of the mountain is privately owned. Can you guess who it is? A very famous tycoon. There are many tycoons in the United States, and quite a few famous ones too." "This is too hard to guess," Barbara said coquettishly. "Not many have connections to Hollywood, are there?" This hint prompted Barbara to ask in surprise, "Could it be Howard Stark?" Henry spoke openly about other people's family gossip. "Yes. That's the one, now inherited by Tony Stark. I heard that a mansion was originally planned here to house a beautiful woman. That beautiful woman's name was Ginger Rogers, another actress from Hollywood's golden age. However, the mansion was never built, and unsurprisingly, the golden couple broke up. That's quite." Having passed away 2 years ago, Barbara kept her mouth shut. After a moment's thought, she asked, "So we're heading to the radio station now?" "Yes. Going down the mountain is the shortest distance. If you were to climb from the bottom of the mountain, the climb wouldn't be a problem, and the distance would be longer than at the top." "You said it's closed. Is it managed?" Barbara asked. Henry replied, "It was originally a real estate advertisement, Hollywoodland. Later, it became a major cultural symbol of Hollywood, and its status grew accordingly. In 1978, Playboy founder Hugh Hefner launched a fundraising drive, and 9 donors each contributed £27,700 to build a new, more durable steel sign, which is still in use today. It's now managed and maintained by the non-profit organization Hollywood Sign Trust. Because someone committed suicide here, the sign is closed to the public." Barbara asked in surprise, "Has anyone committed suicide here? Has anyone died?" Henry replied, "On September 16, 1933, 24-year-old actress Peg Entwistle climbed to the top of the H and jumped to her death. Someone really died. Of course, maybe we can go over there and find some clues from 60 years ago, but don't you think it's a bit of a letdown to talk about something like that on a tour like this?" Barbara complained. "A tour without ghost stories is so boring. It's just that you look like a science guy, and you wouldn't scream like a little girl when you hear a ghost story." "Oh, are you expecting something to happen? I might be able to play along." Barbara leaned over, her large, aquamarine eyes blinking with innocence. Henry didn't respond, but instead changed the subject. He parked the car at a parking lot at the top of the mountain and said, "We're here. Can we get out and take a look? Is this The radio station on the mountain, Barbara asked, unbuckling her seatbelt and looking around. That's right. I just checked. The path to the sign is blocked by barbed wire, and the gate won't open. So we'll have to walk and find a way to sneak in. Or maybe just take a look from the top and be done with it. Henry turned off the engine and got out of the car. Before he could get to the passenger door, Barbara got out on her own. Her attitude was quite casual, and she didn't consider herself an outsider at all. The two of them walked to the edge of the parking lot together, and looking down from the south side of the hill, they just saw the top of the Hollywood sign. A feature that few people notice. Henry pointed to the Hollywood sign below and said, in fact, the 9 letters are built at the same height, but they are not in a straight line. If someone were to take a helicopter and look at the Hollywood sign from the same height, it would appear flat. But when we look at it from the foot of the mountain, we get the illusion of height difference because of the shape of the hillside. Chapter 258, Observe from a distance but not up close. Seeing the top of the Hollywood sign from above didn't seem quite enough. Barbara, not content with that, asked, is there a way down? Henry glanced around and said, I've been here before and did find a way down. If I remember correctly, someone cut the wire over there so you can get in. Otherwise, you have to climb up. Let's go, Barbara said excitedly. Soon, the two of them found the hole Henry had mentioned. One in front, the other behind. They slipped in. Luckily, Barbara hadn't been self-destructive and had been wearing high heels. Even with running shoes, walking on the sandy mountain path often left her flailing her hands to keep her balance. Or she'd even slide down a short distance while standing. The fact that she didn't fall flat on her face was a testament to Barbara's excellent balance. Of course, Henry's frequent support also contributed to Barbara's avoidable fall. Sometimes, however, she would push the man's hand away in disgust, and sometimes, she would throw herself into Henry's arms with a loud cry, then make a playful expression with her tongue out. If Henry hadn't listened to the steady, unwavering heartbeat, he would have thought that he could create some kind of spark with such a beauty. In the end, everything was just an act. With her acting skills, it would be a shame not to pursue a career in Hollywood. Henry didn't expose her and just played along as they stumbled to the bottom of the Hollywood sign. The reason they chose this height to build the landmark was, of course, because the terrain here was just right, with a small platform with a small height difference. Perhaps a part of it had been repaired to provide storage for the engineering unit, but it was no longer visible. However, Barbara's excitement did not last long when she reached her destination, and she was immediately overwhelmed by disappointment. She touched the rusty supporting iron frame and the curled parts of the iron sheet and said, I didn't expect these signs to be so rusty and broken when seen up close. There's really nothing to see. And it's too close, so you can't see them all. Henry laughed and said, a lot of things are like this. If you keep a distance, they will seem beautiful. But as soon as you get closer, all kinds of flaws become apparent. It's a typical example of the American dream. Besides, this place has been rebuilt since 1978, which is nearly 16 years old. It's been out there every day, exposed to the wind, sun and rain, so it's not surprising that it's in such a state. This is just a steel structure. The previous wooden one was in even worse shape, so do you think it's better to keep a distance? Or get closer and accept these flaws? Faced with a pointed question, Henry answered evasively, in Hollywood, it's best to keep a distance. The ideal situation is to be able to see the large letters clearly. If you get too close, not only will you see the rust, but you might also get cut by the upturned metal. And encountering a venomous snake in this desolate place would be quite a hassle. Henry's response was also a double entendre. He was referring to both the Hollywood sign and Hollywood itself. However, the two of them tacitly kept the conversation on the surface. Henry looked up at the sky and said, Bobby, let's go back to the parking lot. It's quite a hike up the mountain, and I don't have a flashlight. If we wait until dark and lose our sight, it'll be troublesome. Darkness was still some time away. But this wasn't a timed operation. It certainly wasn't necessary to wait until just before dark to get back to the parking lot. Seeing the Hollywood sign up close, whether it was filled with satisfaction or disappointment, Barbara nodded, as if resolving a problem. Let's go, she said. Those accustomed to hiking would say that descending is more dangerous, while ascending is easier. But for most people, ascending is more tiring, while descending is easier. It wasn't quite the point where they had to use their hands and feet, or even take a breath after climbing a short distance. But when they returned to the parking lot, Not only had the beanie been removed, but Henry was also holding the fleece coat. The former high school gymnastics champion was also less willing to talk. After getting Barbara to the car, Henry pulled 2 bottles of water from the cooler in the trunk and handed one to the passenger. They both drank the water in one gulp, feeling like they were alive again, with renewed energy. Barbara tried to explain, "It wasn't that long, actually, of course, I understand. After all, we'd been walking all day and were a little tired." Under normal circumstances, no one would have noticed such a slight incline. Seeing the stubborn girl's expression soften slightly, Henry smiled and asked, "How about we go down the mountain and find dinner?" Barbara's eyes widened as she stared at him for a moment, then she smiled and nodded, "Yeah, sure." Henry followed his nose and found a cheap and delicious restaurant nearby. While dining, Barbara and I chatted about our experiences of the day. When Henry dropped her off at the hotel entrance, the girl asked through the window, "Henry, would you like to come up for a cup of coffee?" With her face tilted slightly to the side and her eyes gleaming, her delicate face was undoubtedly alluring. But Henry smiled and said, "I thought it would take at least 3 dates before I'd get an invitation like that. That's just an excuse girls use to politely decline unsuitable boys. If you meet the right boy, you're still foolish enough to ask him out 3 times. You'll never be able to compete with all those girls throwing themselves at you. Aren't you afraid that the boy's attitude will change once you get him? That just proves you had poor judgment and misjudged him. What we should do is remember this lesson, not be afraid of making mistakes. I'm a biology student. If I'm afraid of making mistakes and don't dare to do experiments, I'm doomed to failure. I should change my career as soon as possible." That's a shame. I'm not a firm 3-date person, but I didn't expect to be invited tonight when I went out. I have to go back and feed the cat. Do you have a cat? Barbara asked, raising an eyebrow. Henry smiled and said, "Yes, a very cute tabby. He's a bit of a foodie and has a bad temper. I packed lunch for him before I left, but I still don't have dinner. If he misses a meal, it'll be terrible for my family. I don't keep him in a cage. You don't expect me to be the kind of man who forgets about a hungry cat at home just to have a cup of coffee, do you?" "That's a shame." Barbara frowned, then relaxed. "Then let's meet at the coffee shop at the same time tomorrow? Or maybe a little earlier, and pick me up at the hotel." "Still want to continue, of course. I still have my vacation time, and I haven't seen enough of Hollywood yet," Barbara said with a smile. "Okay, see you tomorrow then." Barbara leaned through the car window, grabbed Henry's shirt, and pulled him closer, quickly kissing him on the lips. She said teasingly, "I hope you remember to prepare dinner for the cat tomorrow." Chapter 259 Trainee Agent. Barbara used her key to unlock the hotel room. Inside the brightly lit room, as expected, sat a black man, carving a steak. He noticed Barbara closing the door. He peeked in and asked, "Bobby, didn't the target follow you up here?" "No, Fury. He said he had to go back to feed the cats and left." Throwing her coat onto the bed, Barbara unceremoniously slid off her shoes. Barefoot, she walked across the hotel room carpet. "Nick," Fury said as he ate his steak, "I hope you don't mind. I waited for you, but I'm getting hungry." "Of course I don't mind. It's all government money, isn't it? You're not going to say you won't reimburse me and ask me to find a way to get it reimbursed?" "Of course not," Barbara muttered. Luckily he didn't come up. Otherwise, seeing this scene, people would definitely think I, a mean woman, tricked him into coming here, but it was actually some old man coveting his white ass. Well, Trainee Agent Bobby, now please report your mission," Nick Fury said seriously. It would have been more convincing if he had put down his knife and fork and stopped eating. Pouring herself a glass of red wine with the dinner, Barbara drank it in one gulp before saying, "If I say this man is quite good and smart. At least he's well informed enough to reel off the names and deeds of celebrities on the Walk of Fame. Of course, it's not impossible that he's just being serious, but what he's saying is all nonsense. But I didn't hear any flaws. Actually, if he's not a colleague, I think a boyfriend wouldn't be bad either." "Are you serious? Is that what you're reporting?" Fury was troubled by the way this bright girl, who had come to SHIELD's attention in high school after helping biology professor Wilma Calvin develop the super soldier serum, spoke so eloquently, even though she was young. "Of course it's not just that. It's just that I jumped to conclusions right from the start, so you didn't hear what you wanted to hear. Isn't that disappointing?" "What do you mean?" Fury put down his knife and fork and said seriously, "Are you saying this man has problems and isn't suitable for us?" "Whether he's suitable or not is hard to say. Although I haven't yet ascertained his political leanings, I can sense his distrust of the government from his words. It's limited to a few sarcastic remarks, nothing more radical. What I'm saying is that recruiting him might not be that easy. What do you mean? Fury picked up his knife and fork and continued to struggle with his steak. Distance. Although his words are frivolous, he's very good at applying the brakes, and he always subtly keeps people at a distance. It's difficult to gain his trust. Without trust, we can't do our job. Without commenting on Barbara's thoughts, Fury simply asked, "Are you sure you can recruit him? He doesn't necessarily have to be a formal agent, a peripheral helper will do." Black Nick Fury hadn't forgotten the advice of his father, White Fury, to organize his own team. It would be best if it was the kind that Shield didn't know about, so that it could become the real power in his hands. Barbara said, "To someone like him, a white lie is still a lie. If I tell him later that I'm only here to recruit him, he'll probably refuse outright. It's the same even if you were to come forward. My impure motives for contacting him were the biggest reason for his refusal. So, let me really be his girlfriend. As long as he's my boyfriend. Then it's only natural for him to help me." Now it was Fury's turn to mutter, "You're not a swallow raised by a polar bear. Our female agent decoy program has always only been about the initial part, not long-term sexual service. They sacrificed themselves for the mission, I volunteered." "The two are different," Barbara said proudly. "That's not necessary. Look at your expression right now, you're like an nymphomaniac." Fury criticized a girl, who was old enough to be his daughter. If he and his first love were a little irrational. Barbara said with dazed eyes, "You don't know, Fury, I don't think his secret is that he's incredibly strong and bulletproof. Although his body proportions are a bit wide for a man's height, that's not fat, a certain Kryptonian, it's definitely not because of greed, it's caused by eating. As a gymnast, I can feel the explosive power of the muscles beneath his skin. They're muscles you couldn't lift even if you were slamming dumbbells in the gym." "Enough," Black Nick Fury interrupted the trainee agent, who was practically drooling. "If you want to carry out Swallow's mission, are you prepared to clean up when his actions conflict with the Bureau's goals?" If something like that happens, Barbara, who had been so serious, suddenly laughed playfully. "The Bureau's goals must be flawed. How could the man I chose make a mistake?" Fury covered his face with his hands and shook his head helplessly. It was over. This trainee agent was ruined. "By the way, sir, I have another date tomorrow. I need to apply for funding." Barbara extended her hand, waving it at Nick Fury. "Fuck. If you want a date, you have to pay for it yourself." "There's no funding," Nick Fury couldn't help but curse. He had called in trainee agent Barbara Morse for a private job. The so-called funding came from his own pocket. "I'm trying to help you find a solution. If I pretend to be a rich woman and support an unemployed gigolo, do you think I could win him over? He told me today, feeling aggrieved, that he has no education and works odd jobs. Such a pathetic person, fuck you. The information I gave you clearly states that he's a tinkerer. He ripped off Andrew Saxon out of $1 million, so he should still have $600,000. How much money are you going to pay to support a man who's full of lies like that?" Barbara ignored the question of whether Henry was lying or not, but rather noted her boss's grammatical errors with a strange eye. "You want FCK me? I can file a complaint with the Bureau. Is this workplace sexual harassment? FCKU, error, SF. I don't care. Mission cancelled. Find a way back." With that, Fury stood up and left, not caring if he hadn't finished his steak. Barbara grabbed him and said, "Wait a minute, sir. At least leave me a ticket back to Georgia." "Fuck, sir. You still want a ticket? I'll pack you up and send you by FedEx. It's cheaper that way." "I'm sorry, sir. I'll do my job. Please forgive my earlier words," Barbara said with a look of grievance, tears in her eyes. "Madfuck." Fury stopped and looked at the pretending to cry Barbara Morse. "I'll give you one last chance. On the last day of your vacation, I'll find a way to lure him to that illegal clinic. Then you'll find a way to use your fake relationship with his landlord to get into his house and plant a bug. Got it? You should have received training on how to install a bug, right?" "Okay, sir." "But," Barbara said hesitantly, "would you mind not waiting in my room tomorrow?" "Forget it, let's cancel the mission," Nick Fury wailed inwardly. This blonde girl was useless. Chapter 260 Shifting Focus. For the next few days, Barbara, once again accompanied by Henry, toured Los Angeles and Hollywood. They particularly visited the sets of major film studios, managing to sneak in and take a look. In places like these, people come and go so often that the guards can barely recognize one another. As long as one isn't acting suspiciously, mistaking them for reporters or fans, no one will bother them. Only certain sets, with their strictest confidentiality requirements, will control access and deliberately turn people away. Otherwise, with Henry's actor ID, registered with the Screen Actors Guild, he had unimpeded access to most areas. The two even observed several filmings and received varying degrees of treatment. For example, Henry was nearly dragged off to do chores. Barbara's beauty made her a target for the other actresses on set, who suspected she was a harlot who had slept with the director and was being drafted in to replace him. However, before anything could become a big deal, the two of them slipped away. There hadn't been any instances of her being co-opted for a cameo role. After all, the Screen Actors Guild was watching over her, and no producer would dare to disregard the rights of a contracted actor, even for a minor role. However, Barbara's appearance and image had attracted the attention of many agents and scouts. The girl, who claimed to be interested in a career in Hollywood, simply accepted their business cards. She wasn't proactive, and instead seemed to be prioritizing her studies again. Unfortunately, Barbara's constant offensive tactics hadn't panned out. Henry always found a variety of excuses to say goodbye each night. On the first day, the cat hadn't been fed. On the second day, the cat had a bone stuck in its teeth, so he had to go back and check on it. On the third day, the cat had overeaten the day before. There wasn't much food prepared for today, so he had to go back and keep an eye on it to prevent it from getting mad and causing chaos. On the fourth day, the cat had an injury, so he had to go back and take care of it early. Of course, Henry wouldn't say it was Katie's tantrum the day before, so he kicked her. After a kick, she'd been quiet. Love education is bullshit, a balance of kindness and severity is the way to go. Because of this, Barbara almost considered Katie the tabby cat a rival. On the fifth day, the last day of winter break from college, Barbara had to catch a flight back to Georgia, so she didn't plan a tour of Los Angeles, and she didn't meet Henry. They had said goodbye the day before and agreed to meet again during the next break. After all, the two places were quite far apart, one on the East Coast, the other on the West Coast. But the prearranged decision not to meet was certainly a prearranged arrangement. Nick Fury, as planned, caused a brawl near the Tinker's illegal clinic in South Los Angeles. It wasn't a big enough fight to attract police attention, nor was it enough for the participants to just go home and lick their wounds. Of course, no one was killed, and no one was harmed. For Black and Hispanic street gangs, such incidents were easy to pull off with a little money. It was almost a daily occurrence for both sides. So no one suspected someone was behind the disturbance. Those who weren't hurt weren't mentioned. Those injured went home to apply medicine. Otherwise, they could simply clean their wounds and apply some saliva to heal. For the seriously injured, their companions usually dumped them in the hospital emergency room. While they might survive, they usually spent time in jail. The police wouldn't let such a crime go unnoticed. Even if the doctor didn't recognize the patient as a wanted criminal, they knew the cause of the wound. Gunshot wounds were always reported. It was standard procedure, no question about it. If the seriously injured had close friends, they might take them to a veterinarian or find skilled paramedics to treat them privately. This way, they could avoid reporting the police and avoid incarceration. Since the Tinker's Clinic opened, the options for the seriously injured have become much simpler. They could simply be taken to this grimy, seemingly unsanitary place. It cost a small fee. While the treatment wasn't always humane, ball-bat anesthesia or surgery without anesthesia while several people held down the patient's hands and feet, were common. At least the patient could survive. So, today, Tinker's illegal clinic was bustling with business again. Whether it's a black gang or a Hispanic gang, essentially, a Mexican gang, there are always seriously injured people coming to his clinic seeking medical treatment. Everyone has a tacit agreement not to cause trouble there. It's not that the Tinker's Black Clinic is neutral territory, where no one is allowed to cause trouble. It's that if you get injured while causing trouble there, you'll have to pay extra for treatment. It doesn't matter if you're the victim or the perpetrator. If you don't pay, the police will arrest you. The Tinkerer doesn't even have to call the police and say he's a freeloader and won't pay. No one who comes to him is clean anyway. Once you're taken to the police station, you'll find shit all over your pants. How long you'll be there depends on your luck. Of course, you have to keep the person away so you don't get implicated. Even if the captured criminal gives the Tinkerer up, the police will often play dumb. They've tried several times but can't catch him, so they just save the trouble. So, the two enemies, who had just shot each other, didn't draw their guns from their pockets when they stood before the fixman's roll-up door. Instead, they feigned ignorance, pulled the door open, and pressed a call bell on the empty freezer. The fixman opened the door from the inside and poked his head out. The scarred man glanced at everyone and said, "Those who are about to die come in first, the rest of you wait." Now that he had spotted his target, Nick Fury, hiding in the shadows, immediately used his cell phone to contact Barbara Morse, a trainee SHIELD agent. Barbara also emerged from her hiding place near Henry's apartment. She immediately spotted old Gary sitting outside the apartment, basking in the morning sun. She waved and greeted, "Good morning, Gary. Isn't that Bobby? Good morning. Aren't you going back to college today? Aren't you leaving for the airport? I wanted to give Henry a thank you gift for showing me around Los Angeles these past few days. I just finished preparing it last night." "Is he in?" Old Gary had no idea about the fixman's situation. He only saw him leave. So he said, "He just left. It doesn't look like he'll be back soon. Why don't you give me the gift and I'll give it to him later?" Seeing the gift wrapped in a small pink paper bag, it didn't look like something you give to a friend. Old Gary raised an eyebrow, made a lewd expression, and said, "Well, isn't this guy I introduced to you quite good? If you like him, be proactive. He's a great guy and a very reliable boyfriend." Chapter 261 Banquet Invitation. When Henry accepted the cute pink paper bag from old Gary, he assumed the female agent had left him some special spy memento. But when he pulled out the adorable stuffed tabby cat from the bag, Henry was startled and asked, "Is this Katie's doll?" "That's thoughtful of you, isn't it?" old Gary said. But he didn't dare tell her about the shock he'd gotten from the real Katie when he and Barbara had opened Henry's door. Henry's X-ray vision hadn't detected any bugs or anything like that inside the doll, and he wondered if he'd misjudged Barbara Morse. Perhaps she was just an ordinary, beautiful college student looking for a boyfriend. But the thought only flashed through Henry's mind, and he brushed it off. One of the main reasons he didn't pursue a career in Hollywood was because he'd heard a well-known agent say about him, "I'm just plain looking, and without polish, my acting skills wouldn't be anything special." So, he booked him into an acting class, and the prices were ridiculously high. It felt like the agent was just looking for the referral fee and hadn't bothered him at all. Without Leonardo DiCaprio's stunning looks to start with, it would take him 10 or 20 years to even gain acclaim for his acting. Henry wasn't interested in pursuing this long supporting role. Don't say you don't need good looks to be an action star. While it's true that action stars don't need stunning looks, they should at least have a certain unique quality that makes them memorable. Henry's defining characteristic lies in his ordinariness, the kind of look that even plastic surgery can't fix. Perhaps disfigurement offers a chance. Using the experienced eyes and standards of an industry agent to judge one's attractiveness, a woman who falls in love with him at first sight would have to be blind. So Barbara's attitude is simply that she's kind, so friendly to everyone? Well, there are good people like that. We shouldn't overthink the world, as if good people are extinct. Even if they're rare, you still encounter them. A street beggar might not give money to every passerby, but there are always a few kind-hearted people throughout the day. A few cents or a grand is fine. Henry held the doll in his hands, his expression indescribable. Old Gary, assisting, said, "This is a gift Bobby picked out for you to thank you for showing her around Los Angeles these past few days. Giving a doll to a man might seem strange, but it's something a girl would do. She told me she'd come see you next holiday." Putting the doll back into the paper bag, Henry smiled and said, "In that case, the next time we meet will probably be in 6 months. Maybe she'll find her Mr. Right this semester, so let's wait until we actually meet. But if she contacts you, thank you for me, okay?" old Gary said, looking disappointed. This expression was so obvious, it seemed intentional, that Henry couldn't help but smile and ask, "Gary, how come I didn't know you were so keen on finding girlfriends?" "Well, your ex-wife's relatives don't count as yours, but do you think with Bobby's qualifications, she'll have no shortage of suitors? I'm still unemployed. I'm even wondering if I should go back to Alaska this year to catch king crabs, or else you won't be able to pay the rent," old Gary said. "I don't see you looking worried. Besides, at your age, shouldn't you have some girlfriends and live like a young person? You're so bored you've even got a tabby cat." The coquettish landlord made a deliberate double-quote gesture. "I'm afraid you'll tell me one day you've got a bitchin' frise." "I won't allow it this time," Henry laughed. Now you have cats and dogs, and it's like a world war in the house every day, right? You think it's bad too. Besides, it's nice to have a girl to take care of you. It doesn't make sense that you don't have to go through the life I was tortured to death by my ex-wife, old Gary said with disdain. Henry said awkwardly, "That's what you really think, old man." Old Gary made an exaggerated expression as if he'd realized he'd let something slip. It looked so artificial and deliberate that it made you want to punch him. Before Henry could consider whether to throw a punch, a conspicuous silver-gray Rolls-Royce pulled up on the street outside the apartment building. A burly, brown-haired, brown-eyed white man in a black suit stepped out. "Is this Mr. Henry Brown?" the man asked. Henry and old Gary exchanged glances, neither recognizing the stranger. And judging by his various behavioral traits, he didn't seem like someone from the government. "So," Henry said with reservation, "perhaps I am. Who are you?" "Hello, Mr. Brown. I'm Happy Hogan. I'm delivering an invitation to tonight's dinner for Miss Katharine Hepburn. You're invited to attend," the man said, pulling an envelope from his pocket and handing it forward. Well, two familiar names again. Katharine Hepburn was self-explanatory. But Happy Hogan, wasn't that Tony Stark's future driver and bodyguard? Was he working for Katharine? Or was that young master actually behind this? Henry opened the invitation, finding both the format and the content familiar. Thinking back, the timing was indeed about the same. During his time as Audrey Hepburn's assistant, invitations to these kinds of parties were practically daily during Oscar season. So, these invitations were incredibly familiar. But invitations were certainly invitations, and for Audrey Hepburn, who had retired from the film industry, she would only attend a few invitations. She politely declined the rest. So, was today's event also an Oscar-related canvassing party? But what did it have to do with him? He wasn't qualified to vote at the Academy. However, the inviter's signature was indeed Katharine Hepburn's. He couldn't refuse this old lady's honor. Putting away the invitation, Henry said, "I understand. Please tell Ms. Hepburn that I will attend on time." This wasn't a formal event, so there was no need for a written reply. A verbal reply would suffice. "Okay, I'll be leaving now," Happy Hogan replied, then drove off in his silver-gray Rolls-Royce. Only then did old Gary say, "Was that Katharine Hepburn's driver?" Henry said, "He must have belonged to someone else, just delivering the invitations. That lady isn't wealthy enough to have a driver driving around in a Rolls-Royce, and she wouldn't use one herself. Then why don't you hurry up and get ready? Aren't we having a banquet tonight?" Seeing old Gary's anxious look, Henry said disdainfully, "This is just an ordinary banquet, not a red carpet walk. There's no point in me dressing up." Chapter 262, Banquet of Old Men and Ladies. Was Katharine Hepburn a fan of social gatherings? No. In her youth, she was quite private, uninterested in boring and superficial social events. She rarely appeared in public, even avoiding ordinary restaurants. But she didn't live a reclusive life, she relished her fame. And as she aged, her protectiveness of her private life gradually weakened. Take, for example, the 92 years when Henry worked as an assistant to another Hepburn, traveling the world. This Hepburn even starred in a television movie, The Man Upstairs. This film earned Katharine Hepburn a nomination for Best Actress in a miniseries or television movie at the 50th Golden Globe Awards. The film tells the story of an elderly woman who develops a love affair with a fugitive. It's safe to say that even in her 80s, this woman, once rumored to be a lesbian, still had a heart for love. However, older filmmakers like these, whose commercial value is less than that of younger generations, remain sought after by Hollywood stars every year during this time of year. After all, they hold the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences votes, determining the direction of the Oscars. Therefore, during awards season, there are often banquets for these veteran filmmakers. The young men and women who attend are mostly Hollywood professionals who released films the previous year and are hoping for Oscar wins. It was one of these banquets that Henry was invited to, held at a villa in Los Angeles. While not on the level of a Beverly Hills mansion, it had a pool and courtyard, and was a designer home, making it quite a nice location. By the time Henry arrived, there were already quite a few cars parked nearby. Unlike the glamorous Hollywood scenes of parties, where luxury cars worth a house are often lined up, the vehicles here were much more modest. Even so, Henry's vintage Cadillac still stood out among the cars. However, adhering to the principle that if he didn't embarrass himself, others would be embarrassed, he drove into the villa's parking lot. As soon as the car parked, A receptionist approached him. While this was a semi-public gathering, welcoming those without an invitation, not everyone was allowed in. At least he's a Hollywood insider. If paparazzi or crazed fans were let in and something went wrong, the banquet company would be in serious trouble. Even if no actual compensation was required, the damaged reputation would mean future business. This was why Catherine had given Henry an invitation when she invited him. He wasn't some Hollywood veteran, nor a well-known, rising star, so he could easily be turned away. However, the invitation was clearly formatted, so there was no need to examine it. The receptionist, with a welcoming expression, politely said, "Welcome, sir. The party has just begun. Please enjoy the food in the main hall, thank you." Tipping wasn't necessary in such situations. After all, banquet hosts interacted frequently with guests. If every gesture required tipping, even cash-strapped celebrities would go bankrupt. How could Hollywood survive? Tipping was only necessary for extra services. People like Henry, who parked their own cars, simply followed the instructions and entered the banquet venue. As expected, the party was primarily attended by elderly men and women. The occasional young man or woman easily caught the eye. When Henry, a nondescript, ordinary-looking man, entered the room, not only were the elderly inquiring, but the youngsters were also wondering who this opponent was. "Henry, here," 87-year-old Catherine called out with full energy. Because the gathering was primarily for the elderly, the attire and atmosphere were both subdued and calm. Everyone went about their business with purpose. There was no blaring music, and no women in revealing clothing. Katharine Hepburn wore a dark blue, white-dotted, stand-up collared casual dress with a red vest. She was more concerned with staying warm in the California winter than looking good. Her hair was a naturally uneven gray, never dyed. Henry wore his 101-piece navy blue Armani suit in a twill tie, looking like the other elderly people present, unlike the actors aiming for awards. An old gentleman with equally white hair nearby asked, "Catherine, who is this young man?" "Oh, Anthony, are you jealous? You're just playing my lover in the movie. This kid is my nephew's generation, and I brought him here to see the world." Catherine took Henry's hand and talked to the old gentleman. Henry was the first to extend his hand and introduced himself. "Henry Brown, a nobody, sir. Anthony Quinn. Nice to meet you, young man." Anyone who can stand next to Catherine can't be an unknown person, right? The old gentleman politely returned the greeting and shook hands. "Hey, Catherine, I think I've seen your little nephew." An old lady nearby walked over. Katharine Hepburn showed a strange smile and said, "Oh, Betty, this way of picking up girls is too old-fashioned. Come on, I really remember it." "In New York, right," Henry replied. "Ms. Lauren Bacall, we met at a charity dinner in New York. At that time, I was Ms. Audrey Hepburn's assistant." "Oh, yes, I remember it." "The little assistant next to Audrey," Lauren Bacall said meaningfully. "Our era has lost another iconic figure." "I really don't know who will be the next one," Catherine retorted, "except for us old guys, who will remember you. So look at you and cherish you. When we are all dead, you will be almost forgotten." Henry opened his mouth and was about to say, "How could that be, Lauren Bacall?" The old lady didn't pinch people's hands with particularly strong force, but she could pinch the right place, and even a Kryptonian skin would feel it. Catherine's eyes glared sharply. "Shut up, boy. I don't want to hear you ramble on about Betty's old movies in front of me." Having been pinched, Henry couldn't afford to lose face with Catherine, so he shut up. He still mouthed The Big Sleep, the classic film starring Lauren Bacall, winking and giving a secret thumbs up. Lauren Bacall, whose real name was Betty Jean Persk, smiled crescent-shaped and said, "Ha, I like this kid." Catherine, quick-witted, slapped the secretly raised thumbs up. Henry, aggrieved, could only suck his finger, making the elderly people present laugh. Actually, there was no conflict between Catherine and Lauren. They were good friends. It was just that as actresses from the Golden Age, there was inevitably some competition. But at their age, that competition is long gone. They just used this little interaction to reminisce about the past. So Henry chose a method that would not offend anyone, not only making the two elderly people happy, but also making the other audience members laugh. Catherine seemed to have been wronged by being backstabbed, but in fact, it was the veteran actors present who were cooperating with the play. Chapter 263 Unreliable Project. "Wait a minute, you said your name is Henry Brown?" Lauren Bacall confirmed again. "Audrey's assistant, the Henry Brown?" "Yes, that's me," Henry admitted. Then, somewhat worriedly, he asked, "What's wrong?" Audrey Hepburn's final recommendation, Love from Another Culture, the Henry Brown? At first, Henry was puzzled by the name. Then he remembered, it was the book that Ms. Hepburn had used his manuscript to publish. The title seemed to have been chosen by the publisher. The publisher was generally responsible for editing and post-production. Since they had agreed not to participate in promotion or book signings, Henry's royalties were relatively low. He held the copyright, but he didn't care about anything else. Suddenly, hearing someone mention that book, Henry himself was at a loss. He said, slightly embarrassed, "I heard the book wasn't very successful. I didn't expect anyone to actually read it." Even Katharine Hepburn, standing beside him, was surprised. "Henry, you're probably not unaware that book is incredibly popular among a certain group of people," Henry said calmly. "To use that term simply proves it's not a bestseller, but only those who like it do. Of course, I'm honored you like it, but I'm only a translator of that book. The stories in it are original, not made up. So if you want to admire them, go find the original author. Even though most of them have been dead for centuries, you kid," Katharine Hepburn said, rubbing her forehead. "You always find a unique way to look at things, and then you leave everyone speechless. Isn't that funny?" "If I had to say, it's incredibly funny," Henry smiled with a look of triumph. Katharine Hepburn complained, "Is it too late to correct your awful personality now? I really want to see what kind of parents could raise such a troublesome child. If you could see the people who raised me, I guarantee you'd think my kindness is the greatest miracle God has bestowed upon this world." Henry said this with a smile, but everyone present, older and more experienced, could not fail to sense the sadness behind his words. Everyone tacitly forgot about the incident and changed the subject. Lauren Bacall then said, "Are you interested in writing a screenplay and adapting one of your stories into a film? I know a lot of film companies are interested in the book. You still have the rights, right?" After a moment's thought, Henry immediately shook his head and said, "Everyone knows the status of screenwriters in Hollywood. The director can make changes if he wants, the actors can make changes if they feel like it, and the producers, of course, have 100 reasons to make changes. Anyway, those stories weren't my original creations. Wouldn't it be better for those interested to work with the people in the land where they take place? I'll let that reputation slide. As for the dialogue, any production company looking to save money will naturally find ways to avoid my version. Instead of arguing about that, let's just see how sincere the production company is," Lauren Bacall said in surprise. "You don't think the film company's adaptation is a good idea?" Henry smiled and said, "Isn't Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra a good example? In fact, many scenes in it seem to have many Egyptian elements in them, but most of them are misused. For example, if the stone sculpture of the guardian god that would only be placed in a mausoleum was placed in the queen's bedroom, how many people would die in real life? But the criticism from Egyptian cultural scholars is probably the most insignificant part of the criticism of this film. Mentioning that tragic and painful precedent, the old Hollywood people present fell silent." Lauren Bacall said in a frustrated tone, "Will it really have the same ending?" Henry nodded seriously and said, "This is simply an inevitable result. Judging from the sales of the book, this is a translated work with a small audience. So when it comes to film adaptation, cost control is the most important profit link. But because it is a different cultural background, if you want to achieve the best restoration in costumes and scenery, you can't do without investment. With less investment, the product will be crude, not to mention whether the people of the original culture will be satisfied, and Hollywood audiences may not accept it. If the investment is too much, there will be pressure at the box office. In fact, the failure of Cleopatra cannot be entirely blamed on Ms. Taylor. She is just the most obvious target. But if I push forward this plan to adapt the translated work, even if it does not lead to the same failure, it will only result in losses, and I may be nailed to the rack of shame for the rest of my life. Maybe after I die, this matter will still be remembered by Hollywood people. There was once a fool who overestimated his own abilities and thought that the stories of foreign cultures were authentic and could also attract arrogant Americans. I don't deny that many people have the courage to explore the outside world and the spirit to identify with other cultures, but this is not the attitude of the majority after all. When cost pressures exceed a certain threshold, attracting conservative audiences to theaters to see a film promoting pagan culture becomes the only way to make a profit. Honestly, the mere thought of it makes me despair," Lauren Bacall said angrily. "I thought this would be a good project." Henry, feigning innocence, said honestly, I hope so, too. But if the cultural incompatibility isn't resolved, it won't end well. If a jerk were to ask me about copyright, I'd just take the money. It would be best if I weren't even a co-signer. But since Ms. Bacall asked this, I have to make my concerns clear. I don't want to be considered a jerk later, Katharine Hepburn then insisted, saying, "Son, next time you have something like this, tell me in confidence. I'll definitely get you a good deal on the adaptation, and any subsequent failure won't be your fault." That would be great. Lauren Bacall also gave up her original idea and said regretfully, "What a shame, I thought I could team up with Katharine to play the White Snake and the Green Snake." For your information, Lauren Bacall was born in 1924. This year is 1994, making her a 70-year-old grandmother. Katharine Hepburn was born in 1907, making her 87, even a great-grandmother. These two want to play Bai Suzhan and Zhaoqing. Well, age-wise, 87 and 70, wanting to play a 1,000-year-old demon and a 500-year-old goblin, are definitely too young. Henry didn't know where to start complaining. Hollywood always casts young women in their 20s or 30s with faces brimming with collagen to play the 1,000-year-old vampire queen. For an Eastern goblin to have to use a beauty from the Golden Age, this Western filter is just frosted glass. Or is Sushion blind? No wonder in the original version, Sushion begged Fathe to subdue the two demons. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264 Unreliable Project. Wait a minute, you said your name is Henry Brown? Lauren Bacall confirmed again. Audrey's assistant, the Henry Brown? Yes, that's me, Henry admitted. Then, somewhat worriedly, he asked, "What's wrong?" Audrey Hepburn's final recommendation, Love from Another Culture, the Henry Brown? At first, Henry was puzzled by the name. Then he remembered, it was the book that Ms. Hepburn had used his manuscript to publish. The title seemed to have been chosen by the publisher. The publisher was generally responsible for editing and post-production. Since they had agreed not to participate in promotion or book signings, Henry's royalties were relatively low. He held the copyright, but he didn't care about anything else. Suddenly, hearing someone mention that book, Henry himself was at a loss. He said, slightly embarrassed, "I heard the book wasn't very successful. I didn't expect anyone to actually read it." Even Katharine Hepburn, standing beside him, was surprised. "Henry, you're probably not unaware that book is incredibly popular among a certain group of people," Henry said calmly. "To use that term simply proves it's not a bestseller, but only those who like it do. Of course, I'm honored you like it, but I'm only a translator of that book. The stories in it are original, not made up. So if you want to admire them, go find the original author. Even though most of them have been dead for centuries, you kid," Katharine Hepburn said, rubbing her forehead. "You always find a unique way to look at things, and then you leave everyone speechless. Isn't that funny?" "If I had to say, it's incredibly funny," Henry smiled with a look of triumph. Katharine Hepburn complained, "Is it too late to correct your awful personality now? I really want to see what kind of parents could raise such a troublesome child. If you could see the people who raised me, I guarantee you'd think my kindness is the greatest miracle God has bestowed upon this world." Henry said this with a smile, but everyone present, older and more experienced, could not fail to sense the sadness behind his words. Everyone tacitly forgot about the incident and changed the subject. Lauren Bacall then said, "Are you interested in writing a screenplay and adapting one of your stories into a film? I know a lot of film companies are interested in the book. You still have the rights, right?" After a moment's thought, Henry immediately shook his head and said, "Everyone knows the status of screenwriters in Hollywood. The director can make changes if he wants, the actors can make changes if they feel like it, and the producers, of course, have 100 reasons to make changes. Anyway, those stories weren't my original creations. Wouldn't it be better for those interested to work with the people in the land where they take place? I'll let that reputation slide. As for the dialogue, any production company looking to save money will naturally find ways to avoid my version. Instead of arguing about that, let's just see how sincere the production company is," Lauren Bacall said in surprise. "You don't think the film company's adaptation is a good idea?" Henry smiled and said, "Isn't Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra a good example? In fact, many scenes in it seem to have many Egyptian elements in them, but most of them are misused. For example, if the stone sculpture of the guardian god that would only be placed in a mausoleum was placed in the queen's bedroom, how many people would die in real life? But the criticism from Egyptian cultural scholars is probably the most insignificant part of the criticism of this film, mentioning that tragic and painful precedent. The old Hollywood people present fell silent. Lauren Bacall said in a frustrated tone, "Will it really have the same ending?" Henry nodded seriously and said, "This is simply an inevitable result. Judging from the sales of the book, this is a translated work with a small audience. So when it comes to film adaptation, cost control is the most important profit link. But because it is a different cultural background, if you want to achieve the best restoration in costumes and scenery, you can't do without investment. With less investment, the product will be crude, not to mention whether the people of the original culture will be satisfied, and Hollywood audiences may not accept it. If the investment is too much, there will be pressure at the box office. In fact, the failure of Cleopatra cannot be entirely blamed on Ms. Taylor. She is just the most obvious target. But if I push forward this plan to adapt the translated work, even if it does not lead to the same failure, it will only result in losses, and I may be nailed to the rack of shame for the rest of my life. Maybe after I die, this matter will still be remembered by Hollywood people. There was once a fool who overestimated his own abilities and thought that the stories of foreign cultures were authentic and could also attract arrogant Americans. I don't deny that many people have the courage to explore the outside world and the spirit to identify with other cultures, but this is not the attitude of the majority after all. When cost pressures exceed a certain threshold, attracting conservative audiences to theaters to see a film promoting pagan culture becomes the only way to make a profit. Honestly, the mere thought of it makes me despair, Lauren Bacall said angrily. I thought this would be a good project. Henry, feigning innocence, said honestly, I hope so, too. But if the cultural incompatibility isn't resolved, it won't end well. If a jerk were to ask me about copyright, I'd just take the money. It would be best if I weren't even a co-signer. But since Ms. Bacall asked this, I have to make my concerns clear. I don't want to be considered a jerk later. Katharine Hepburn then insisted, saying, son, next time you have something like this, tell me in confidence. I'll definitely get you a good deal on the adaptation, and any subsequent failure won't be your fault. That would be great. Lauren Bacall also gave up her original idea and said regretfully, what a shame, I thought I could team up with Katharine to play the White Snake and the Green Snake. For your information, Lauren Bacall was born in 1924. This year is 1994, making her a 70-year-old grandmother. Katharine Hepburn was born in 1907, making her 87, even a great-grandmother. These two want to play Bai Suzhan and Zhao King. Well, age-wise, 87 and 70, wanting to play a 1,000-year-old demon and a 500-year-old goblin, are definitely too young. Henry didn't know where to start complaining. Hollywood always casts young women in their 20s or 30s with faces brimming with collagen to play the 1,000-year-old vampire queen. For an Eastern goblin to have to use a beauty from the Golden Age, this Western filter is just frosted glass. Or is Sushion blind? No wonder in the original version, Sushion begged Fathe to subdue the two demons. Chapter 265, Long Lost Tony. Everyone in the lounge was, of course, familiar with Tony Stark's face. Precisely because of this familiarity, they were surprised to see him in person. Katharine Hepburn, however, wasn't surprised at all. She waved, saying, little Tony, you're finally here. Katharine, sorry, there's traffic. Even Tony at this stage would still find excuses. Henry was quite enlightened. But on second thought, it was perfectly normal. After all, the person questioning him was considered an elder, no one to be trifled with. And he hadn't yet reached the arrogant demeanor he would later assume before becoming Iron Man. Once all the elders who could check him were dead, he'd be unstoppable. However, Henry didn't react much upon seeing the man, which aroused Tony's curiosity and questioned Katharine. Did you tell him? No, I didn't say anything. The two of them were engaged in a conversation, like a puzzle. Henry, however, picked up the food from his plate and ate, taking a moment to say, the only person Katharine could invite to a party like this is someone we both know. So seeing you shouldn't surprise anyone. Tony, who was beginning to grow a beard, bared his teeth. He regretted making the invitation and wanted to leave. However, Happy had already followed his instructions and sent everyone out of the lounge. Only Katharine, Tony, and Henry remained in the lounge. After Happy cleared the room, he also waited outside. Tony looked at the food Henry had picked out on his plate, his eagerness to eat but his fear of reaching out was obvious. Catherine saw this and said, "Eat, little Tony. What Henry picked out is delicious. At least it doesn't taste weird. I remember you weren't so polite before." The young master reached out and ate whatever he liked. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. Since someone else would pay for it, he was completely unscrupulous and fearless. But this time, Tony said firmly, "No," and turned his head away from the plate of food on the table. This made Henry laugh and say, "Why, I didn't poison you. Are you so afraid of death?" A joke earned Tony a sharp look and a serious expression. He asked, "What did you know?" Surprised by this reaction, Henry lowered his voice and said, "Did someone really poison you?" Hearing this, Catherine asked worriedly, "Tony, what happened?" Tony Stark simply shook his head, not intending to elaborate. But now that it was all known, not explaining would only make Catherine worry. So he simply said, "Maybe the food was unclean, so I had diarrhea." In fact, he had been rushed straight to the hospital's VIP ward that time, and he almost died. He used to despise his father, who had so many quirks and taboos outside. Only when he reached the same heights did he realize the depth of the world's malice. Those quirks were all for self-protection. Take, for example, the security team around him. Tony Stark never imagined he'd need a team of them to protect him. Henry could see the young master's immature stubbornness, but he kept it to himself. Speaking too much about someone you've just met is a taboo. Catherine, however, had no such concerns. She said bluntly, "It's not just diarrhea, is it?" It was a tacit understanding within the circle that matters couldn't be shared with outsiders, but that didn't mean the old woman couldn't see or hear them. Tony didn't want to dwell on this matter too much. After all, the more you said, the more mistakes you made. In the end, he managed only one sentence, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." This made Henry chuckle. He said, "This is the first time I've seen Nietzsche's words used to explain something. Shouldn't this be used as a conclusion after an impassioned speech?" Tony retorted sharply, "Which is more important, the answer or the process? Those who emphasize the process are just trying to cover up their inability to find the answer. You know my conclusion. Seeing me standing here is enough. Haha, young master, you've made progress. At least you're not about to have a stroke after just 3 sentences," Henry said teasingly. Then he asked, "Tell me, what exactly did you want to do by calling me here?" Watching the man before him casually eat from his plate, Tony finally couldn't stand it anymore and stuffed a few items into his mouth. As he chewed, he said, "You don't have a job now, so come help me. As the CEO of Stark Films, how much annual salary do you want?" This Hollywood of this world didn't have RKO, one of the once powerful Big 8. In its place came Stark Pictures, founded by Howard Stark. Stark Pictures, seemingly replacing RKO, produced many renowned films in the 1930s and 1940s. For example, Walt Disney's first animated film, Snow White, was released by Stark Pictures at a time when Disney lacked distribution capabilities. There was also King Kong, considered a milestone in monster movies, and Citizen Kane, frequently ranked among the 10 greatest films in the UK and later recognized by the American Film Institute as one of the 100 years, 100 films. Of course, the films Howard Stark directed and starred in were also produced by his own studio, including several with Katharine Hepburn. Before the 1950s, Stark Pictures was undoubtedly one of the 8 major Hollywood studios. However, a world war shifted Howard Stark's focus elsewhere. While he still loved movies, he was unable to devote as much time to them. Stark Films began shrinking its production roster, shifting to equipment manufacturing and rental, which better utilized Howard Stark's ingenuity. This meant it became a logistics arm for other film studios. While the production and distribution departments remained within the purview of the wealthy Howard Stark, those with talent and ambition quickly left for other studios. Howard Stark, knowing his own business, didn't prevent these individuals from leaving. Instead, he encouraged them, allowing his company to downsize. So, while Stark Films still maintains production and distribution capabilities, it exists as a small arm supporting independent films. It's Stark Films equipment and gear rental program that significantly supports the development of Hollywood. The latest camera equipment is, of course, sought after by major film studios, which will consider leasing or even purchasing it outright. However, some of the older equipment also meets the needs of independent films with limited funds or emerging directors with aspirations. It's only through old Stark's personal passion that Stark Films has survived to this day. Hearing the name suddenly filled Katharine Hepburn with nostalgia. She hadn't initially expected Tony to bring this up. Was Stark Films about to rise again? As for Henry, he asked in astonishment, Stark Films is still around? I thought your Obadiah Stane would sell or close this company, which isn't involved in military projects, like the others. Chapter 266, Long Lost Tony. Everyone in the lounge was, of course, familiar with Tony Stark's face. Precisely because of this familiarity, they were surprised to see him in person. Katharine Hepburn, however, wasn't surprised at all. She waved, saying, "Little Tony, you're finally here." "Katharine, sorry, there's traffic." Even Tony at this stage would still find excuses. Henry was quite enlightened. But on second thought, it was perfectly normal. After all, the person questioning him was considered an elder, no one to be trifled with. And he hadn't yet reached the arrogant demeanor he would later assume before becoming Iron Man. Once all the elders who could check him were dead, he'd be unstoppable. However, Henry didn't react much upon seeing the man, which aroused Tony's curiosity and questioned Katharine. "Did you tell him?" "No, I didn't say anything." The two of them were engaged in a conversation, like a puzzle. Henry, however, picked up the food from his plate and ate, taking a moment to say, "The only person Katharine could invite to a party like this is someone we both know. So seeing you shouldn't surprise anyone." Tony, who was beginning to grow a beard, bared his teeth. He regretted making the invitation and wanted to leave. However, Happy had already followed his instructions and sent everyone out of the lounge. Only Katharine, Tony, and Henry remained in the lounge. After Happy cleared the room, he also waited outside. Tony looked at the food Henry had picked out on his plate, his eagerness to eat but his fear of reaching out was obvious. Katharine saw this and said, "Eat, little Tony. What Henry picked out is delicious. At least it doesn't taste weird. I remember you weren't so polite before." The young master reached out and ate whatever he liked. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. Since someone else would pay for it, he was completely unscrupulous and fearless. But this time, Tony said firmly, "No," and turned his head away from the plate of food on the table. This made Henry laugh and say, "Why, I didn't poison you. Are you so afraid of death?" A joke earned Tony a sharp look and a serious expression. He asked, "What did you know?" Surprised by this reaction, Henry lowered his voice and said, "Did someone really poison you?" Hearing this, Katharine asked worriedly, "Tony, what happened?" Tony Stark simply shook his head, not intending to elaborate. But now that it was all known, not explaining would only make Katharine worry. So he simply said, "Maybe the food was unclean, so I had diarrhea." In fact, he had been rushed straight to the hospital's VIP ward that time, and he almost died. He used to despise his father, who had so many quirks and taboos outside. Only when he reached the same heights did he realize the depth of the world's malice. Those quirks were all for self-protection. Take, for example, the security team around him. Tony Stark never imagined he'd need a team of them to protect him. Henry could see the young master's immature stubbornness, but he kept it to himself. Speaking too much about someone you've just met is a taboo. Katharine, however, had no such concerns. She said bluntly, "It's not just diarrhea, is it?" It was a tacit understanding within the circle that matters couldn't be shared with outsiders, but that didn't mean the old woman couldn't see or hear them. Tony didn't want to dwell on this matter too much. After all, the more you said, the more mistakes you made. In the end, he managed only one sentence, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." This made Henry chuckle. He said, "This is the first time I've seen Nietzsche's words used to explain something. Shouldn't this be used as a conclusion after an impassioned speech?" Tony retorted sharply, "Which is more important, the answer or the process? Those who emphasize the process are just trying to cover up their inability to find the answer. You know my conclusion. Seeing me standing here is enough. Haha, young master, you've made progress. At least you're not about to have a stroke after just 3 sentences," Henry said teasingly. Then he asked, "Tell me, what exactly did you want to do by calling me here?" Watching the man before him casually eat from his plate, Tony finally couldn't stand it anymore and stuffed a few items into his mouth. As he chewed, he said, "You don't have a job now, so come help me. As the CEO of Stark Films, how much annual salary do you want? This Hollywood of ours didn't have RKO, one of the once powerful Big 8. In its place came Stark Pictures, founded by Howard Stark. Stark Pictures, seemingly replacing RKO, produced many renowned films in the 1930s and 1940s. For example, Walt Disney's first animated film, Snow White, was released by Stark Pictures at a time when Disney lacked distribution capabilities. There was also King Kong, considered a milestone in monster movies, and Citizen Kane, frequently ranked among the 10 greatest films in the UK and later recognized by the American Film Institute as one of the 100 years, 100 films. Of course, the films Howard Stark directed and starred in were also produced by his own studio, including several with Katharine Hepburn. Before the 1950s, Stark Pictures was undoubtedly one of the 8 major Hollywood studios. However, a world war shifted Howard Stark's focus elsewhere. While he still loved movies, he was unable to devote as much time to them. Stark Films began shrinking its production roster, shifting to equipment manufacturing and rental, which better utilized Howard Stark's ingenuity. This meant it became a logistics arm for other film studios. While the production and distribution departments remained within the purview of the wealthy Howard Stark, those with talent and ambition quickly left for other studios. Howard Stark, knowing his own business, didn't prevent these individuals from leaving. Instead, he encouraged them, allowing his company to downsize. So, while Stark Films still maintains production and distribution capabilities, it exists as a small arm supporting independent films. It's Stark Films equipment and gear rental program that significantly supports the development of Hollywood. The latest camera equipment is, of course, sought after by major film studios, which will consider leasing or even purchasing it outright. However, some of the older equipment also meets the needs of independent films with limited funds or emerging directors with aspirations. It's only through old Stark's personal passion that Stark Films has survived to this day. Hearing the name suddenly filled Katharine Hepburn with nostalgia. She hadn't initially expected Tony to bring this up. Was Stark Films about to rise again? As for Henry, he asked in astonishment, Stark Films is still around? I thought your Obadiah Stane would sell or close this company, which isn't involved in military projects, like the others. Chapter 267, Trouble Under the Table. Katharine, Tony Stark looked at someone seriously, rarely, and simply called out their name. They say age brings wisdom. After a brief exchange of glances, Katharine stood up and said, well, I've rested long enough. I'm going to go talk to those old friends. You young people, continue. With that, she walked out of the lounge. Henry didn't insist on following her. He noticed Tony winking with amusement. After Katharine left, he asked, who do you distrust? Is it necessary to clear the area like this? Or should I leave too? If we want to rob a bank but don't want to drag someone into it, it's right not to tell that person. This has nothing to do with trust. Even if we tell them, they'd rather not hear. So, you want me to rob a bank? You're Tony Stark. So the target is at least on the level of the Federal Reserve, right? Okay, I'll go. 50-50, not too much. No, the target might be worse. Tony Stark pulled a small pen-shaped instrument from his tailored suit. The object was thicker than a fountain pen. He pressed the cap of the pen, and instantly a high-frequency noise that was inaudible to the average human ear came out. Of course, ordinary people couldn't hear it, but that was not the case for Henry. He was so disturbed by the sudden noise that his expression almost lost control. However, it didn't cause him physical discomfort. Henry pretended not to know and asked, what is this? A little gadget to prevent eavesdropping and recording, Tony said. The equipment you have on you is almost like that of an agent. I took it from the old man's inventory. It was his invention from 20 years ago. I haven't had time to improve it yet, so I'm using it for the time being. Seeing that Henry wanted to change the subject, Tony had to interrupt him and said, enough. This old thing from 20 years ago is very power-consuming. We don't have much time to waste. To make a long story short, do you remember the gunfight we had in a villa somewhere? I plan to investigate the people behind the gunmen. I'm personally watching over the East Coast, and I need someone on the West Coast, too. That's why I stayed at Stark Films, because Hollywood is the closest place to that group. These aren't words Katharine should hear. This isn't something I'm saying for her own good, but rather that these things shouldn't be shared with too many unrelated people. Even for you, I'll only reveal more if you agree to join. Haha, Henry continued with his smile. Since I know this is a problem, why would I jump into it? So you better stop talking. What if I can help you with your FBI troubles? Would that be enough in exchange for your help? Tony Stark said, feigning profoundness. FBI troubles? How could I not know I was being targeted by the FBI? I didn't notice the reason, I just noticed you were on a list. There are many lists, not just the FBI's. But to you, I think this one is the most threatening. Well, that's very stark. Henry, helpless, spread his hands and said, let's not talk about my business for now. I'm just asking, it's been a few years since that happened, why are you so persistent and insist on getting to the bottom of it? Tony Stark pondered for a moment and said, do you remember the cause of death of the old man and my mother? A car accident. Is there a problem? Nodding, Tony said, the public statement is that the car's braking system was defective, which caused an accident while driving, leading to a car accident, killing the driver and passenger. So, you sued the company that made the brakes? No, I bought them. Tony's answer surprised Henry. The proud young master continued, I told them that if they don't sell it to me, the sky-high compensation I'll ask for will make them go bankrupt. I ended up buying their company for half price, fixed a flaw in the brake system, and then sold the entire company for about 3 times its market value. Part of my inheritance tax was financed by this company. Henry clapped his hands and said, excellent, very impressive. You're saying this because you want me to praise you, right? Shut up. That's not the point. Furious, Tony took a few deep breaths to calm himself before continuing, what I'm saying is that the old man can fly airplanes and has raced race cars on the track. The brake system of the car he was driving that day was flawed, to be sure. But with his skill, he wouldn't have caused such a serious accident. So, you suspect, Henry said cooperatively, using a reserved tone. Tony said seriously, I hadn't noticed it before. Since becoming CEO of Stark Industries, things have happened around me that have forced me to reevaluate certain things, including the old man's car accident. Have you found any evidence? In response to Henry's question, Tony simply shook his head and said, no, the medical examiner's autopsy and the accident investigation were flawless. But the brake system revisions have brought to my attention a problem. What problem? I didn't personally verify my parents' autopsies. I simply read other people's reports and confirmed they were the real victims. The young master's implication was that he couldn't rule out the possibility of tampering. Although it was difficult to directly state the truth in his memory, after all, Henry couldn't guarantee that it was indeed the truth of this world. But he still offered a helpful suggestion. Have you checked the road surveillance footage? Who do you think the perpetrators might be? There are no surveillance cameras at the accident site, at least that's what the agency I'm working with told me. As for who might have done it, I can only say that 1% of Americans have a chance. Could it be that 1%? Henry pointed to the sky, alluding to the true power holders in the United States, those who controlled 99% of the country's wealth. That 1%, Tony nodded. He added, but that only means they have a motive. It doesn't mean they've actually done it, or that I'll find any evidence of them doing it. It seems like you've had an exciting life these past 2 years. You've hired a whole bunch of bodyguards, Henry said with a sneer. You've met Happy Hogan, who's from Brooklyn. He used to be a boxer with no real achievements. He saved me when I was in a test drive accident, and now he's the head of my security team. Most of his people are hired by him. You trust people like that? Henry asked curiously. To me, that kind of person is more trustworthy now than someone with a clean resume. Is that why you've turned to someone like me with such an unknown background? At least you've proven you're not someone who can be easily bribed. You were able to reject me and the Mellon family. I don't think you'll be so easily accepted by anyone else. And of my bargaining chips, Stark Films is the most attractive one, right? Tony said confidently. Chapter 268, Trouble Under the Table. Catherine, Tony Stark looked at someone seriously, rarely, and simply called out their name. They say age brings wisdom. After a brief exchange of glances, Catherine stood up and said, well, I've rested long enough. I'm going to go talk to those old friends. You young people, continue. With that, she walked out of the lounge. Henry didn't insist on following her. He noticed Tony winking with amusement. After Catherine left, he asked, who do you distrust? Is it necessary to clear the area like this? Or should I leave too? If we want to rob a bank but don't want to drag someone into it, it's right not to tell that person. This has nothing to do with trust. Even if we tell them, they'd rather not hear. So, you want me to rob a bank? You're Tony Stark. So the target is at least on the level of the Federal Reserve, right? Okay, I'll go. 50-50, not too much? No, the target might be worse. Tony Stark pulled a small pen-shaped instrument from his tailored suit. The thing was thicker than a fountain pen. He pressed a cap of the pen, and instantly a high-frequency noise that was inaudible to ordinary ears came out. Of course, ordinary people couldn't hear it, but that was not the case for Henry. He was so disturbed by the sudden noise that his expression almost lost control. However, it didn't cause him physical discomfort. Henry pretended not to know and asked, "What is this?" "A small gadget to prevent eavesdropping and recording," Tony said. "The equipment you have on you is almost like that of an agent. I took it from the old man's inventory. It was his invention 20 years ago. I haven't had time to improve it yet, so I'm using it for the time being." Seeing that Henry wanted to change the subject, Tony had to interrupt him and said, "Enough. This old thing from 20 years ago is very power-consuming. We don't have much time to waste. To make a long story short, do you remember the gunfight we had in a villa somewhere? I plan to investigate the people behind the gunman. I'm personally watching over the East Coast, and I need someone on the West Coast, too. That's why I stayed at Stark Films, because Hollywood is the closest place to that group." These aren't words Catherine should hear. This isn't something I'm saying for her own good, but rather that these things shouldn't be shared with too many unrelated people. Even for you, I'll only reveal more if you agree to join. Haha. Henry continued with his smile. "Since I know this is a problem, why would I jump into it? So you better stop talking. What if I can help you with your FBI troubles? Would that be enough in exchange for your help?" Tony Stark said, feigning profoundness. "FBI troubles? How could I not know I was being targeted by the FBI? I didn't notice the reason. I just noticed you were on a list. There are many lists, not just the FBI's. But to you, I think this one is the most threatening." "Well, that's very stark." Henry, helpless, spread his hands and said, "Let's not talk about my business for now. I'm just asking, it's been a few years since that happened. Why are you so persistent and insist on getting to the bottom of it?" Tony Stark pondered for a moment and said, "Do you remember the cause of death of the old man and my mother? A car accident. Is there a problem?" Nodding, Tony said, "The public statement is that the car's braking system was defective, which caused an accident while driving, leading to a car accident, killing the driver and passenger. So, you sued the company that made the brakes?" "No, I bought them." Tony's answer surprised Henry. The proud young master continued, "I told them that if they don't sell it to me, the sky-high compensation I'll ask for will make them go bankrupt. I ended up buying their company for half price, fixed a flaw in the brake system, and then sold the entire company for about 3 times its market value. Part of my inheritance tax was financed by this company." Henry clapped his hands and said, "Excellent, very impressive. You're saying this because you want me to praise you, right?" "Shut up. That's not the point." Furious, Tony took a few deep breaths to calm himself before continuing, "What I'm saying is that the old man can fly airplanes and has raced race cars on the track. The brake system of the car he was driving that day was flawed, to be sure. But with his skill, he wouldn't have caused such a serious accident. So, you suspect," Henry said cooperatively, using a reserved tone. Tony said seriously, "I hadn't noticed it before. Since becoming CEO of Stark Industries, things have happened around me that have forced me to reevaluate certain things, including the old man's car accident. Have you found any evidence?" In response to Henry's question, Tony simply shook his head and said, "No, the medical examiner's autopsy and the accident investigation were flawless. But the brake system revisions have brought to my attention a problem." "What problem?" "I didn't personally verify my parents' autopsies. I simply read other people's reports and confirmed they were the real victims." The young master's implication was that he couldn't rule out the possibility of tampering. Although it was difficult to directly state the truth in his memory, after all, Henry couldn't guarantee that it was indeed the truth of this world. But he still offered a helpful suggestion. "Have you checked the road surveillance footage? Who do you think the perpetrators might be?" "There are no surveillance cameras at the accident site, at least that's what the agency I'm working with told me. As for who might have done it, I can only say that 1% of Americans have a chance." "Could it be that 1%? Henry pointed to the sky, alluding to the true power holders in the United States, those who controlled 99% of the country's wealth. "That 1%, Tony nodded. He added, "But that only means they have a motive. It doesn't mean they've actually done it, or that I'll find any evidence of them doing it." "It seems like you've had an exciting life these past 2 years. You've hired a whole bunch of bodyguards," Henry said with a sneer. "You've met Happy Hogan, who's from Brooklyn. He used to be a boxer with no real achievements. He saved me when I was in a test drive accident, and now he's the head of my security team. Most of his people are hired by him. You trust people like that? Henry asked curiously. To me, that kind of person is more trustworthy now than someone with a clean resume. Is that why you've turned to someone like me with such an unknown background? At least you've proven you're not someone who can be easily bribed. You were able to reject me and the Mellon family. I don't think you'll be so easily accepted by anyone else. And of my bargaining chips, Stark Films is the most attractive one, right? Tony said confidently. Chapter 269 Stark Films. Henry wasn't sure how to react to Tony Stark's mysterious confidence. He just watched him casually, expounding on his thoughts. Wall Street on the East Coast and Hollywood on the West Coast are the two tentacles most easily accessible to that level. I'll personally monitor the East Coast. Here on the West Coast, I need someone I can trust to keep an eye on it as well. The biggest reason I came to you is that you're not afraid of them sending someone to clean you up. Unless you're telling me that your tortoise shell could be pierced with a single RPG, of course, that's no reason to be careless. I'm sure you wouldn't be so foolish as to arouse their vigilance and make them determined to eliminate you, but the place I want you to monitor is so high up that it's impossible to see. So, making you CEO of Stark Films is both the condition I'm giving you and the price I must pay for your commitment, Henry said nonchalantly. In other words, my CEO position is just a figurehead. Of course not, Tony said generously. Stark Films is one of the few companies still wholly owned by me. Since I've appointed you CEO, you'll have every bit of authority you deserve. I don't need you to share profits annually, just don't let the company's losses reach the point of bankruptcy. Currently, the company's primary business is equipment rental and sales, with divisions also involved in equipment research, development, manufacturing, and repair. If you have free time, please help me see if there are any improvements to the equipment. Given your skill with that little gadget, Tony nodded, pointing to the small Bluetooth headset Henry had made for Audrey Hepburn at the New York fundraising event. I'm sure you'll have many ideas for machinery and equipment. The company won't take any of this work for free. It will award bonuses based on the same standards as for technicians. If you have patents to apply for, you can also use our legal team. This should greatly avoid the situation you're describing. Stark Industries should be thankful that we don't steal others' achievements in this regard. No one can steal our patents unless we voluntarily relinquish them. Besides the equipment and patents, if you want to restart the company's film production division, that's fine. You can use the funds freely. The same requirement applies. Don't drive the company into bankruptcy. How is that for? Wow. That's really? Henry wasn't sure how to describe it. He asked, will the people at Stark Films accept you just parachuting in as CEO? Tony said, the old man has always been the CEO of Stark Films. Since his death, the position has been vacant, and I haven't appointed anyone else, but the company's main business now is related to equipment. Even the R&D department has a fixed budget, and no film production investment requires special approval, so, department managers are conducting daily operations according to past practices. After all, the old man hasn't been focused on this area since 50 years ago, and he's mostly hands-off. Whoever I appoint as CEO, no matter what others think, they'll just accept it. At most, they might privately refuse to cooperate. This is a small problem you can't solve. You need me to help you. Looking back at the list of publicly traded companies on Wall Street, Stark Films certainly wasn't on the list. Henry asked curiously, you own the company wholly? No other shareholders, Tony replied, in the early days. The old man did have some partners. But due to the company's business transformation, most shareholders were either pessimistic or looked down on making such a small profit. A lot of it was bought back then. Some of them got older, and the old man used his preemptive right to buy back their shares, so they didn't become part of their inheritance. By the time it came to me, it was a wholly private company. Henry continued, I heard you sold off a lot of valuable assets when you were raising money for your estate taxes. You were even called a spendthrift in the beginning. So, no Hollywood studio was interested in Stark Films. How is that possible? Tony said proudly. Every powerful studio on the market expressed interest in acquiring us at the time. We even had outsiders approach us, hoping to enter Hollywood through Stark Films. But one of their requirements was that I be the head of the equipment R&D department. Otherwise, I had to provide a certain number of equipment improvements every year to maintain our equipment leadership. Those old guys thought I was young and easy to manipulate. They wanted me, a man worth hundreds of billions, to work for them, Truly wishful thinking. They wouldn't budge, and I wouldn't agree, so the matter dragged on. Once I've resolved the tax issue, there'll be no reason to sell Stark Films. Because of the business negotiations, Stark Films missed out on my move to take all of my subsidiaries public. Today, Stark Films is one of the few wholly private companies still under my control, and it's profitable. It's not some junky thing that loses money every year and wouldn't even want it if given away. Is that so? Henry pondered. From Tony Stark's perspective, if Stark Industries, now a military-industrial complex, is a limited edition luxury car, then Stark Films is a children's toy-level matchbox car. This is one of the main reasons he dared to give Stark Films away for his own play. Even if it went bankrupt and liquidated, it wouldn't matter to him much. It would just be the loss of a base on the West Coast. And judging by this guy's attitude, if he says he's delegating power, he really means it. Just don't let him get away with his life of luxury. Think of Stark Industries, Obadiah Stane and Pepper Potts, 2 generations of tools, each one exhausted. So one rebelled, while the other more directly turned hostile and took over the Stark family. If she hadn't become Mrs. Stark, would Pepper Potts have killed Tony Stark one day, following in Obadiah's footsteps? Henry's thoughtful expression gave Tony the wrong impression, suggesting he was still hesitating. Remembering the condition he hadn't mentioned, he added, "If you're still worried about the FBI and being on certain lists, I can tell you, don't worry. Once you become my employee and enter this world, those people will know how to hold back. Unless you run into a police officer or FBI agent and kill someone today and get caught red-handed, no one will touch you easily." After much deliberation, Henry decided to say, "Do you know that I'm currently working for the Continental Hotel?" Chapter 270. No matter how high you stand, there are still blind spots. What? Tony's expression flashed with shock for the first time today, then turned serious. Henry didn't answer directly, but instead smiled and said, "Look, you thought you were standing higher up, giving you a wider view. But in reality, there's still a blind spot. You didn't notice what happened to me, right? So, you're a killer now." Tony crossed his legs and placed his hands on his knees. His wariness was evident. Henry shook his head and said, No. The Continental Hotel is a system with many jobs. Not everyone is a gunman, taking on murder missions. Don't tell me they also find puppies and rescue kittens. From what I understand, if you're willing to offer a 100,000 reward, it's not impossible, Henry said honestly. Tony thought for a moment and decided to ask for clarification. "What's going on?" "Tell me everything you can," Henry replied. "The Continental Hotel is an intermediary platform. In addition to contracted gunmen, there are also a series of service projects derived from this work. For example, if someone is injured and these people cannot be sent directly to the hospital, of course there must be medical personnel to deal with it. After the work is completed, someone has to clean up the environment and destroy evidence and bodies to avoid being entangled by the police. This is also the responsibility of professionals. If someone witnesses it or calls the police, and the situation tends to get out of hand, then someone has to step in to control public opinion. Of course, there is also intelligence collection about the target, and there are people who sell guns and make custom bulletproof vests. In short, there are many aspects of the work at the Continental Hotel. It's not just about holding a gun, running up to someone, and taking his life, which may be innocent or not so innocent." Tony's expression softened slightly and asked, "So you are the kind of person who is responsible for cleaning up the aftermath?" "I am the kind of person who helps stop the bleeding and dig out a bullet when someone is shot," Henry said honestly. It seemed that as long as Tony didn't shoot and kill people himself, he could still be saved. He complained, "Why did you join that side instead of finding a proper job?" "I was tricked by the FBI." Henry told him about how he was sent to State Senator Mike Horton by the FBI, and then the gunmen from the Continental Hotel attacked in large numbers and he was captured. Henry added, "Anyway, State Senator Horton's family is dead, even his bodyguards are gone, and I'm the only survivor. You don't have to think about how the police will target me. Except for running away, running to a place where no one can catch me. If I still want to live a normal life, I have to find a way to solve the problems from the FBI. The simplest way is to find a backer that the other party will be afraid of." Tony said dissatisfiedly, "Have you ever thought about asking me for help?" Spreading his hands, Henry said, "I don't want to sell myself, so I don't have enough bargaining chips to find you. The Continental Hotel will become my option because they accept the deal. Maybe in the eyes of some people, it may not be fair. Take my situation. For example, I've put in quite a bit of work, but the FBI still keeps me on their radar, rather than just removing me from the list. At least in my daily life, I don't have to be targeted by those well-dressed guys in suits, constantly being watched over. Or constantly being hassled. Lifting his chin, Tony said proudly, "Now that I'm here, you can give up your job at the Continental Hotel and come work for me. I guarantee your FBI file will be clean the next day." Haha, Henry scoffed. "That's the point I'm trying to make. You think you have it all figured out, but there are still things you don't know. What you want me to do, aside from the fact that finding a second immortal isn't easy, I believe with your power, there's no way there won't be someone else available to fill that role, and yet, my current position happens to be right in your blind spot. Don't you think my remaining position would be more helpful to you than becoming a more prominent figure? Having dealt with all sorts of cunning old men and women, Tony Stark is no longer the college student who gets lost in a few words." He squinted his eyes, staring at the person in front of him for a moment, and then said, "In the final analysis, you just don't want to help me and bear the Stark mark. Because according to your logic, in your current position, I can just bribe someone. If the Continental Hotel's attitude is so straightforward, most of the needs can be solved by trading. I believe I can find a more responsible helper than you there. But you don't think that asking you to be the CEO of Stark Films is an answer I came up with on the spur of the moment? Forget it, it's useless to explain so much to you if you are not interested. So let it be." Henry showed an expression of appreciation and said, "Not bad. It seems that the experience of these 2 years has made you no longer like a naive student who simply takes his life for granted, and there is only one side of the truth." Fuck. Shut up. Our relationship is not good enough for me to tolerate such sarcasm, the eldest young master said angrily. "Okay, I apologize." Henry raised his hands to show weakness, and continued, "How about this? Let me change the question. What do you want to do?" The young master asked angrily. "What do you mean I want to do?" Henry asked back. "You suspect that your parents' car accident is not simple, and even something happened to you, so you have to start from that equally impure place. After you finally find out the answer, what do you want to do? If they did it, you want revenge? If they didn't do it, will you uphold fairness and justice and give them the legal sanctions they deserve? Or will you ignore the bad things found out by the investigation, turn a blind eye, just to maintain the rules of your circle? Is there any difference whether all this is done by a certain person or the conclusion of collective will? Or does all this have nothing to do with your parents? You just want to scrape off the cancer of society and rebuild a social structure with good customs? Or, you didn't think about anything at all, you just want to chase an answer?" Looking at young Master Tony's bewildered expression, Henry smiled and said, "I've seen too many people who claim to hope for a better life, only to plunge headfirst into the pursuit of money and abandon life altogether. The most ridiculous thing is, the money these people save through frugality is squandered by their families. For various reasons, they neglect their families, their wives, and their loved ones. In the end, they're left with nothing, nothing at all. Similarly, you realize that what you're about to do is risky, even life-threatening. So, is your goal worth the risk? Or do you want to gain leverage over these people so you can become king? The purpose of slaying the dragon is to become the only evil dragon, is that right?" Henry stood up, leaned down, and leaned very close to Tony Stark's ear as he sat. He lowered his voice and asked, "One last question, are these actions your own, or are you being instigated by someone else without realizing it? If it's the latter, have you ever considered yourself a pawn in someone else's hands, charging ahead? And will that person firmly support your position, or do they gain something just as much when you're the one being sacrificed? If it's the former, I suggest you reconsider. I don't want to play along with you until the end, only to be the abandoned pawn you've abandoned. Frankly, in a game of that magnitude, can I trust you completely? Please think carefully about this, Mr. Tony Stark. Don't easily agree to something you can't keep. You'll ruin your limited reputation." With that, Henry picked up the pen-shaped jammer from the table, tossed it to Tony Stark, and said, "This little gadget's out of power." That concludes our conversation for today. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271 Daily Life in Los Angeles. The secret meeting with Tony Stark yielded no results. There was neither a clear refusal nor a clear agreement between the two. It was undeniable that the CEO of Stark Films was a tempting proposition. With that young master's audacity, he'd certainly dare to hand the company over to him. Then, he could let everything run its course. He kept saying he didn't want it to go bankrupt. But if that ever happened, he'd probably just get a few laughs and be done with it. But Henry still didn't dare intervene, primarily fearing Tony Stark's reckless, sometimes impulsive behavior. He shut down Stark Industries' munitions division, launched the Ultron project, and even exploded 30 or 40 matches like fireworks. Each of these actions highlighted Tony Stark's irrational nature, often accompanied by a huge price, yet he himself showed no concern. If you were forced to clean up the mess, Henry worried Iron Man wouldn't live to see Thanos snap his fingers, let alone embrace that 1 in 14 million chance of victory. And then there were the ring of eyes surrounding him. If he got too close, he'd be exposed to their sight. Such hassles were best avoided. By comparison, he was only on the FBI and many other lists, which wasn't a big deal. He'd been prepared for this situation since the day he'd revealed his abilities. While it proved he was different from ordinary people, a 1 in 5 billion percentage difference wasn't the same as a few 100,000 or even millions of a 1 in 5 billion percentage difference. This world was filled with dangerous superpowers and otherworldly creatures. A single invulnerability wouldn't stand out on this vast sea of invulnerability. Besides, he had no distinctive appearance, so he could easily blend in. Unless the Joker's true identity was revealed by the X-Men. But considering the X-Men were an organization built on the mutants' tragic history, if they easily betrayed anyone, it would be a blow to their reputation. It was a gamble, and Henry felt his odds were pretty good. If the X-Men saw him as a threat, they wouldn't inform the US military or the government, but would instead come and fight Henry, the alien. So, as long as you're careful, you can still live a leisurely life. The season shifted from spring to summer, slowly moving towards them. The girl's skin, almost suffocating from winter's heavy clothes, eagerly craved freedom. Winter clothes gave way to spring, and the more daring ones donned summer clothes, at most wearing a coat for morning and evening. As one of the most glamorous cities on Earth, Los Angeles, home to Hollywood, boasts a far greater number of beautiful women walking the streets than any other city. Others, however, knew how to display their fashion sense, flaunting the luxury goods they wore and carried. Henry wasn't often at home. Sometimes, he'd carry a camera, like a paparazzi or a talent scout, secretly photographing beautiful women on the street. At that time, image rights weren't as prominent as they are today, so as long as he wasn't too blatant, he'd usually be fine. Besides, Henry wasn't taking those weird photos, just street scenes and people. If there was a problem, the camera film would be pulled out and exposed, and there would be no evidence. Sometimes he'd just take his sketchbook out, find a spot, a perspective, and sketch the street scene for his own amusement. If someone lingered on the street for a while, perhaps sitting on a park bench or leaning against a railing, Henry could still create a simple portrait. Being outdoors, he couldn't use his super speed, of course. But he was becoming increasingly adept at sketching a complete image with just a few strokes. He spent more time wandering outside, not only to enjoy the scenery, which was so different from his previous life in which he, as a social worker, had never been able to experience, but also because of the over $600,000 in black money he'd received. Unable to deposit cash into the banking system, he had to spend it quickly to feel comfortable. The simplest use for it was to cover small, everyday expenses. So Henry began wandering the streets of Los Angeles, trying every street food spot and every famous restaurant. He'd actually done this before, when he first arrived in Los Angeles. But those were restaurants he'd chosen based on his sense of smell. The aromas were above standard, so the taste wouldn't be bad either. This time, however, he'd visit more ordinary restaurants, as long as they weren't overly technologically engineered with chemical flavors. Henry would try them and find their strengths. Having relaxed his standards, he'd indeed found quite a few restaurants whose flavors rivaled those he'd already discovered, expanding his LA culinary landscape. Just for this bite of food, the South Side Black Clinic was closing more often. Especially when someone was watching nearby, Henry would simply close. After all, he didn't have to save anyone to survive. It was just a bargain with the Continental Hotel, a way to expand his clinical experience. Even if he closed down, Henry wouldn't lose out. Besides, the FBI issue wasn't handled well by Muni Fisher, the Continental's manager. There were still those greedy, scheming cops looking to play dirty. Henry hadn't paid much, having initially offered a blood contract as a condition. But he had only joined the Continental Hotel as a freelance servant. So, he couldn't really blame her for her sloppy work. Henry had already thrown 3 people into space, and he didn't know how this would play out. The only thing he knew for sure was that it wasn't a good time to allow more police officers or FBI agents to disappear without a trace. It would only draw more attention. The best approach, of course, was to remain silent for a while and actively distance himself from any potentially troublesome situations. Upgrading his home computer, perfecting the core robot BB's functionality, working on Tiger Katie's brainwave translator, and CK's online activities, it wasn't that Henry had forgotten about these things, but rather that he had deliberately slowed down his pace. The tasks were there, and with no deadlines from the client, what was the point of rushing them? And that wasn't to mention that some of these projects had no end in sight. As long as he set his mind to them, he could continue. What Henry had at hand was already so far ahead of the times, almost catching up to the level he was familiar with. To continue developing, he needed some incentive. Otherwise, what he had on hand was more than enough for his own use. Especially with the functional kits released by Mr. CK on the internet and the development of Linux that he promoted, if he didn't slow down a bit, others would not be able to keep up. Henry didn't want to be a solo act, and it would be enough to show a slight advantage. Katie's brainwave translator had entered the data collection stage and had made initial progress. The next step was to continuously collect data, compare and correct it, so that the results of brainwave translation could be more accurate. This is a slow and steady process, and it can't be rushed. Even if the performance of the software or hardware is upgraded, it won't make the tiger speak human language the next day. So just endure it. Henry, who was having a meal in the restaurant, was thinking about his recent achievements while cutting his steak. Chapter 272 Thief. Because he often had to avoid the FBI and the police, Henry was constantly vigilant. Any slight movement would draw his attention, but most of the time, he chose not to intervene. But today, something was different. A girl had sneaked into the restaurant. She looked like an inexperienced newbie, ready to do something nefarious. Not only did she catch Henry's attention, but even the waiters and other diners noticed her movements. They just didn't openly watch her. She sidled up to the salad bar, taking advantage of a break when the waiters were busy, grabbed a few bread rolls from the salad bar, and then hurried out as if nothing had happened. Even though the waiters were busy, quite a few people were watching her. Some, seeing her, quickly dropped their belongings and tried to catch up. While the salad bar and bread rolls were free for diners to take as they pleased, those not dining in were, of course, not allowed to take them. Not to mention, this was bordering on theft. A waiter immediately tried to give chase. Just as the thief took off, and the waiter strode after her, Henry stepped in front of the impending action. He was a large woman, and the frail thief couldn't withstand a single blow from her. Henry pressed 2 bills into the waitress's hand, saying, "One for the bread, and one for your tip. Let's just call it a day, okay?" Both bills were 5-cent bills, more than the price of many of their meals, so there was no reason to disagree. The waitress tucked the bills into her apron pocket, made a resigned expression, and said, "It won't happen again, okay?" But the thief, who should have been fleeing, didn't leave the restaurant. Instead, she turned back, biting her lower lip, tears in her eyes, and stubbornly pressed the bread into Henry's hand, turning to leave. Henry grabbed the girl's hand, and just then, her stomach rumbled. This made the girl, already looking indignant, blush instantly, feeling neither amused nor embarrassed. Judging from her age, she looked like she'd just graduated from high school, still sporting a bit of baby fat, but her complexion wasn't quite normal. Henry said, "How about I treat you to lunch, Mom?" The girl turned to look at him, a look of alarm on her face. She glanced at her held hand. This prompted Henry to release her and say, "If you don't want to get something for nothing, then in exchange, you can be my model, and the reward will be this lunch." This inexplicable offer made the girl even more wary. She touched her arm where it had been grabbed and cautiously took a step back, realizing that her words were a bit off. After all, in this city full of dreams, there were also many traps. Henry explained, "It's not some strange modeling job, it's a sketching job. You don't have to go anywhere. Just wait until you finish your meal and sit down for a while. I'll have 5 or 10 minutes to finish the sketch." "That's not a difficult offer, is it?" "Why?" the girl asked. Picking up the sketchbook he brought today from his seat, Henry flipped through a few landscape paintings, showed them, and said, "I've been hungry, and that's the most horrible torture in the world. So I understand that feeling. Judging from your clothes, you don't look like a homeless person, so this difficulty should only be temporary. It's just a lunch, it's nothing to me." As he spoke, the guests around him applauded and cheered for Henry's statement. In any case, kindness is always worthy of praise. Henry greeted those around him, and quickly grabbed the girl who wanted to run out, and said, "You are here to chase your dreams in Hollywood too. You can't make it in this industry if you are thin-skinned." The girl turned her head, staring with big eyes, blinking. Releasing his hand, Henry gestured toward his table and said, "If you want to hear it, take a seat. But don't expect to hear any success stories." Turning around, Henry waved to the waitress and said, "Menu, please." The girl took the menu and looked at it. Henry said, "Order whatever you want. This isn't the time to be a lady and pretend you have a small appetite." Henry's joke immediately caused a pair of dead eyes, as if looking at a dead person, to appear behind the menu. This made him laugh it off again. Meanwhile, he observed the girl in front of him, who looked somewhat familiar. She was a typical blonde Caucasian with well-proportioned features. Her eyes were a bit deep, a noticeable feature that made her face stand out from the crowd. It wasn't easy to comment on a person's figure, so Henry wouldn't constantly use X-ray vision to look at what she looked like under her clothes. After all, not every naked body can be described as beautiful. Clothes are a good protection, protecting others' eyes. The girl, wearing a spring long-sleeved casual dress that didn't emphasize her features, made it difficult to assess her figure. However, judging by her wrists and palms, she did have a touch of flesh. It wasn't quite fat, but it was still a far cry from the morbid aesthetics of a model. The girl ordered several high-calorie meals in a row, clearly hoping to eat enough to last 3 days. From her perspective, she was paying a price to be the model for his sketches. So, at a time like this, there was no need to be polite, she needed to eat her fill. Henry, of course, didn't stop her. 600,000 in black money could keep her eating at this family-run restaurant for 100 years. Such a small sum wasn't a big deal. In that instant, Henry suddenly connected the girl with a future celebrity. If she were a little thinner, she'd look a lot like that person. Would it be so perfect? Henry wondered. "Hello," the girl waved her hand in front of Henry's face, as if to attract his attention. Henry, regaining his composure, asked, "What's wrong?" The girl asked, "Are you an actor?" Henry answered honestly, "I'm registered with the Screen Actors Guild and have appeared in a few films. But they were always background roles, and the films never made it to theaters. They were all B-movies that went straight to video." "Oh," the girl said disappointedly. Henry smiled. "That's why I say, don't expect to hear about success stories. People like me are everywhere in Hollywood." "So is this path difficult?" the girl asked. "Rather, there's so much I could do, so I wasn't actively pursuing opportunities as an actor. Like when I became someone's assistant. The salary was good, and I stayed for a year or two. Then why did you quit?" "My boss passed away. I can't possibly go to heaven and stay with her," Henry said with a smile. Chapter 273 Dream Chaser. The girl politely said, "I'm sorry." The meal arrived just then. Henry didn't say anything more, but gestured at the large pile of food on the table. The girl, undeterred, began to eat with voracious gusto. Watching the person across from him tuck in, Henry slowly cut his steak and put the meat between his teeth. The food in this restaurant was impeccable. While not overpoweringly fragrant, the meat was perfectly cooked. The intense heat of the steak grill trapped the juiciness and flavor within the slightly charred exterior, allowing for a multitude of flavors in one bite. The two chatted intermittently throughout the meal, focusing primarily on the food and the girl's questions about Henry's Hollywood experiences. Henry, reciting the advice that old Gary had given him when he first arrived, selected the appropriate ones and relayed them to the young woman. Forget about the advice about stunts and special character roles. If you want serious acting, you can't get too involved in those kinds of roles. It's easy to get stereotyped. In today's Hollywood, with its strict divisions of labor, once you're stereotyped, it's difficult to move on. Neither of them discussed much personal life, simply exchanging experiences about the acting profession. The girl, a novice who hadn't even crossed the threshold, naturally listened more than spoke. Henry, on the other hand, had only a few supporting roles. He had appeared on major productions like The Devil's War, but had been let go midway. So, he simply didn't mention that incident, to avoid the hassle of explaining anything. In short, it was a conversation between two noobs. Even though Henry had a few supporting roles, he couldn't offer much advice. Most importantly, he had little experience working with agents. And agent skills are half the battle for success in Hollywood. Whether there's news about new films or access to producers, it's fair to say that an agent's connections and abilities determine the breadth of an actor's career. Of course, the actor's ability to pull off the roles they secure and generate positive market response are crucial for subsequent opportunities. It's fair to say that the ceiling of an actor's success lies with both the actor and the agent, who are at the other end of the spectrum. In this area, Henry couldn't offer much advice. He didn't even have anyone to introduce him to. This reminded Henry of the unreliable stunt team leader, Channing Williams. He hadn't spoken to him in a long time, and he had tricked him into being a bodyguard at the banquet, which really got him into trouble. He decided not to count on him anymore. After they finished their meal, Henry ordered coffee for both of them and pulled out his sketchbook. The girl asked with a hint of concern, "Should I strike a pose?" "Whatever, just be comfortable. This isn't a makeup shoot for a fashion magazine, with all the angles and shadows. It's just a simple sketch, okay?" The completely inexperienced girl chose to look Henry in the eye. This made the man she was staring at chuckle. The girl complained, "Is there a problem, Henry?" His face pursed, said seriously, "Yes, a big one. You can't stare at the camera like that when you're filming, or the director will scold you. And this isn't an ID photo, so there's no need to be so serious, but I don't know what to do." "You're the one who won't say anything." The chubby face, now satiated and full, had a slightly rosier hue. The girl puffed up her chubby cheeks and said unhappily. Henry had no choice but to ask, "Are you an American?" "No." The girl shook her head. "I'm not an illegal immigrant, don't misunderstand me." "No." Henry thought for a moment, then said, "Then think back to your childhood, interesting experiences, happy things. Don't focus on anything specifically. If you find it hard to focus your eyes." Henry looked around, then at the restaurant's lighting. He took the salt shaker from the table, placed it in a fixed spot, and said, "Then just look at the salt shaker." With his gaze shifted, the angle changed. The midday sun shone through the restaurant's large windows, illuminating the girl's profile, creating two distinct areas of light and dark. Henry's adjustment was primarily to the window, reducing the dark areas on her face. Thanks to the girl's deep features, the light was layered, making the young girl's skin seem to shimmer in the sunlight. Henry flipped to a blank page in his sketchbook and picked up a pencil. He wasn't like the average person, who would fiddle with a pencil to find the correct scale before drawing in his sketchbook. Simple lines and outlines, with Kryptonian observation and control, were a simple matter of copying a photograph. Henry's true passion lay in the subtle shading, which gave the sketch a three-dimensional quality and a delicate texture. The girl also noticed that the man drawing was mostly staring at her, not looking at the sketchbook, simply brushing away. Could he be scribbling? But his previous sketches were excellent, not like doodles. So, was this sketchbook someone else's? Or had it been scribbled all over? With a sense of unease, the joys of childhood faded. It wasn't her fault, after all, her childhood wasn't filled with many memorable moments. She spent most of her time hiding in her mother's arms, avoiding her father's violence. To be happy, one must work hard. Especially since things had been tough lately, with her beloved ballet no longer available and her Hollywood career struggling, how could she possibly be happy? Thinking of this, the girl suddenly realized that the other party wanted her to be happy, which was to torture her and deliberately take revenge. Ah, this damn annoying guy. The girl's expression changed drastically with such hatred that even her eyes became sharp. Henry caught the charm of this moment and began to adjust the portrait in the sketchbook. The eyes, the corners of the mouth, everything had a bit of the flavor of the beauty in his impression. Although Henry said it would take 5 to 10 minutes, everyone would take 10 minutes as the standard. But in fact, he finished the sketch in about 5 minutes. Henry exclaimed happily, "It's done." Then he looked at his painting with satisfaction. The girl leaned forward and asked, "Can I see it?" "Of course," Henry said, handing over the sketchbook. "I didn't make you look ugly, so don't tear up my drawing." Looking at her own sharp expression in the drawing, the girl's expression was complicated. "Is that my expression?" Henry smiled and said, "I imagine you're probably thinking about hitting me, or maybe even planning to punch me," as if her secrets had been exposed. The girl turned away guiltily and said, "No, can you sign your name for me?" Henry handed over the pen. Seeing the girl's puzzled expression, he added, "I didn't steal this drawing, I have to know the girl's name. Unless you don't mind 100 or 200 years from now, a bunch of strangers calling her Mona Lisa or something. The girl took the pen and muttered, "You're not Da Vinci," but she signed it anyway. Chapter 274 Charlize Theron. Because the spelling was unusual, Henry saw it and asked, "How do you pronounce this?" The girl replied, "In English, it's Charlize Theron." "That's Afrikaans, my native language." "So, you're South African," Henry said with surprise. This wasn't an act, he was genuinely surprised to have encountered the South African diamond known as the Hollywood Venus. Yes, after signing her name, Charlize didn't return the sketchbook. Instead, with a curious look, she asked, "Would you like to flip through it?" There wasn't anything shameful inside, so Henry said generously, "Please." The future Oscar-winning actress flipped through the pages. Henry always left a note in the blank space after completing his sketches, or at least a note about the date, location, and so on. He didn't like cursive, but he didn't write entirely in block letters. Anyway, it wouldn't be difficult for others to read. This sketchbook isn't a dedicated art sketchbook, it's a relatively large, thick, unlined notebook, about B5 size. It has a spiral back, so you can flip to the back of the book for easy drawing. Most of the sketches are pencil, with the occasional ballpoint pen sketch. The subject matter is primarily Los Angeles street scenes, with few people. The occasional person is included as part of the scenery, simply because they happen to be in the scene I wanted to paint for a long time. Time keeps fast-forwarding, from May 1994 to January 1994. Turning the page again, it's back to December 1992. The sketching location is a courtyard in the Swiss town of Trochenau. Actually, that was Audrey Hepburn's home, Henry just didn't note it. It's a simple snowy courtyard scene. No people, but Robert's 5 Jack Russell Terriers are featured. Dogs aren't very good subjects for sketching, so the 5 dogs were drawn and based on impressions. There were only 2 or 3 sketches of the town of Trochenau. Then, flipping back to September 1992, she saw that, in addition to simple landscapes, there were also more sketches of people. Only one figure and theme remained constant, everything else was constantly changing. It was an old woman playing games with a group of children. There were children from Africa, Central and South America, and even South and West Asia. The scenery from different places, along with the children's different appearances and clothing, all reflected the characteristics of each region. The old woman was so striking that Charlize couldn't ignore her. Furthermore, her face looked increasingly familiar, and the locations noted next to the sketches were from all over the world, reminding her of a famous Hollywood star. Charlize spread a sketch of a woman's face in front of Henry and asked, "Who is this, Ms. Audrey Hepburn?" Henry answered truthfully. "It's really her," Charlize exclaimed in surprise. He then said, "So this is a sketch of Ms. Hepburn while she was at the United Nations. Did she go all over the world?" "Strictly speaking, it's a child protection agency set up by UNICEF to assist poor countries. It's mainly concentrated in Africa, Central America, South America, and South Asia, not all over the world." "Then you said you were someone's assistant, and then your boss passed away, so you didn't continue." "So you were Audrey Hepburn's assistant?" "Yes." "What's your name?" Charlize Theron asked. "Hey, haven't I introduced myself yet?" "Hello, I'm Henry Brown, a nobody, eh?" Charlize Theron showed a surprised expression and asked. "Is it Henry Brown, the author of Love from Another Culture? The book that Audrey Hepburn so passionately recommended?" She mentioned that book again. Henry rubbed his nose and said, "It's me. But I must emphasize that the book is a translation, so I shouldn't be considered the author. Those are long-standing stories in different cultural contexts, not my creations, but, she stammered, speechless at the sudden sight of a young, uninitiated Charlize Theron, a celebrity she'd imagined. She was actually a little skeptical. However, there was a female thief at their table, who had already attracted the attention of the waitstaff. She sketched and chatted without hiding from others, so everything she said and saw was visible to everyone. When a non-bestseller book was mentioned, one of the waitresses burst into excitement. The one with the most action, the one who nearly caught the future actress, even ran to the staff lounge, pulled out a book, and excitedly approached the table. "Is this really Mr. Henry Brown?" "Yes." Henry smiled at the book in the woman's hand. "Ah, you bought it. I'm surprised. Would you like me to sign it?" Yes. Can you?" The waitress handed over the rather thin book. It wasn't in great condition, but it hadn't been treated roughly, just frequently read. Henry took it, pulled a pen from his pocket, and asked, "What's your name, Lorraine?" Henry flipped to the blank page under the cover. In cursive, he saw the following: "To Lorraine. Wishing you everlasting health and beauty. Henry Brown, thank you, the waitress said excitedly, hugging the book. There are so many beautiful love stories in it. It's a pity there aren't any happy endings." Henry made a helpless expression and said, "That's the original story. I'm just translating it." Several waitresses crowded aside, looking at the signature on the book and shouting excitedly. At least they remembered this was a work setting, not a book signing, and so, under the restaurant owner's watchful eye, they returned to their tasks. Charlize Theron, with a hint of suspicion in her eyes, asked, "Are you really Henry Brown?" "The author, the translator of that book," Henry said helplessly. "I can show you my driver's license. But if you ask me to prove whether I actually knew Ms. Hepburn or whether I translated the book, I can't produce it. I have a photo of Ms. Hepburn, but I keep it at home. I also have a contract with a publisher, but that's also at home. You don't carry that kind of stuff around with you, showing it to people all the time, do you?" After a moment's thought, Charlize asked, "You look surprised you have a fan." Henry said honestly, "I don't know what you think of the book, but the publisher told me the sales haven't been very good. But it looks like a long-term seller. This isn't the kind of book that's published for a week or two, gets snapped up, and then dies down. Right now, it's just about making sure we don't lose money and break even on printing costs. From that point forward, we'll be profitable, but we'll have to sell it slowly." Chapter 275: The Narrow Road to Success. Charlize was puzzled and frustrated by the poor sales of a book she also loved. She asked, "Didn't Audrey Hepburn recommend your book? Why did it do so poorly?" "Think about it this way. Without Ms. Hepburn's recommendation, perhaps the book would have done even worse," Henry said honestly. Despite the disappointing sales, Henry, as a translator, wasn't particularly concerned. He explained, "According to the publishing editor's suggestion, this book would be well suited for promotion through book signings. I travel around the country, using Audrey Hepburn's fame to attract fans, and then find ways to expand that audience. But from the beginning, this book wasn't part of my plan, so I don't really care about performance. As long as the publisher doesn't lose money printing it and there aren't any complaints, that's enough for me. Why would I even expect sales figures? Not part of the plan." "What do you mean?" Charlize asked. "Actually, it was just an afternoon reading session, with an elderly person in hospice care pestering me with stories she'd never heard before." Henry briefly recounted the events of that time, adding, "The manuscript left behind was given to the publisher by Ms. Hepburn, and that's how this book came to be. But, you clearly had a great opportunity." Charlize Theron, on the brink of despair, expressed a certain resentment towards Henry's lack of commitment. But she didn't know how to approach the conversation. Henry smiled and said, "You think I should work hard to promote this book, build up my reputation, and then I can do this and that, right?" Charlize nodded. Henry could only explain, "But this book is just a translation, not my original work. If I treat it as my own, promote it relentlessly, and pocket the profits myself, don't you think that would be strange? Although the true creators were ancient people hundreds, even thousands of years ago, and their works are already unrestricted by copyright. I'm just a cultural distributor, not a creator." "Well, that seems to be the case." Charlize showed a slightly embarrassed expression. "Right." Henry spread his hands and said, "Anyway, I didn't think about making a lot of money from these books at the beginning, so I didn't bother to organize any book signing events. The promotion is also handled by the publishing house. That's why you have the opportunity to doubt whether I am the translator myself, because not many people have seen me yet," Charlize Theron said angrily. Seeing that a talented person could only waste time in Los Angeles, she couldn't help but say dejectedly, "If Hollywood is so difficult, should I go back to South Africa, really dissuading a future movie queen?" Henry smiled heartlessly. "If you feel it's hard, going home early is also an option. Is there anyone else in your family?" If the world hadn't changed, Henry knew the answer. But he still asked knowingly. Charlize Theron said, "And mother, if you feel you can't hold on, why not go home early? That way, your family will worry less. If you want to keep fighting, let go of those negative thoughts. People who worry too much might not dare to grab opportunities even when they're right in front of them." "That's right. What about you? You've gotten so far, why don't you stay in Los Angeles and go home?" Charlize said angrily. I don't have anywhere to go back to, Henry said with a heartbreaking smile. Charlize paused and stammered, "Oh, sorry, I don't know." "There's nothing to be sorry about. Because there's no way out, I'm more accepting of reality." "That's a good thing." Henry wrote down a phone number and handed it forward. "There's a saying in my hometown, at home, rely on your parents, away from home, rely on your friends. If you need any help, feel free to call this number. I have an answering machine. If you don't pick up, just leave a message. I'll listen. I may not be able to help you become a superstar, but at least I've been in Hollywood for a few more years than you have, so I can give you some advice." Staring blankly at the note on the table, Charlize didn't take it. Instead, she asked, "I know everything has a price. What do you expect from this?" "Huh, smart girl, you're certainly vigilant," Henry complimented her, then said, "Let me put it this way. Since I came here alone, I've received help from many people. And they don't need anything in return, so just think of it as me spreading this kindness. Of course, whether you accept it or not is your choice. Resisting all contact might just push away the very hand that could help you. If you want to make it in Hollywood, that's not a smart move." Charlize asked a direct question. "Then how do I distinguish between good and bad people?" Tisk, tisk, tisk. Henry shook his head. "While it sounds like a good question, it's actually asking the wrong question. Why? Because here, there's no such thing as a strictly good or bad person. Of course, you can tell whether someone has broken the law, and whether they've been sentenced and punished for it. That's something you can do, but I don't think that's the answer you're looking for." "What do you mean by there's no strict definition of good and bad?" Henry said. "When you expose your weaknesses and vulnerabilities, even those you once thought were good people might do bad things to you. And those people others consider bad, if you're willing to share benefits and have good negotiation skills, they might even become your helpers. Your behavior determines whether someone can help you or hurt you. As for those lunatics who are clearly high and armed with guns, stay as far away as possible. They're unreasonable and outside the scope of this discussion." Charlize Theron, clearly stunned by the chaos, said, "So, I have to be both generous in accepting help and smart in protecting myself. Is that possible?" Henry smiled and said, "It absolutely has to be. If you want to completely cut yourself off from others to protect yourself, then you might as well go back home and quit Hollywood. That's the safest way, but if they accept every favor and request, slink into the beds of producers and directors, and open their legs to anyone, then the most successful actresses in Hollywood would be those from the San Fernando Valley. Although, in a way, they are successful. Regardless, the real world isn't so black and white. None of the actresses who make it to the top of Hollywood are fools or idiots." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.